of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time.
Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Glory, coming up to very nearly 3 minutes past 6, and we are here for the duration of the next 4 hours. 4 glorious hours of Morning Glory from 6 until 10 every single weekday morning. It is Thursday, ladies and gentlemen, the 27th of February. That means it's going to be March in 2 days' time. I know you might not be as excited about that as I am, but, you know, quite frankly, the sooner we get out of February, the better. We will bring you all the news that's fit to print and some of the stuff you didn't even know you wanted to hear about. Rafe Heilemann-Koo is here, historian, broadcaster, senior fellow at the New Culture Forum, of course, as well. He's going to be commenting on all the paper stories this morning, which are mostly centred on Keir Starmer's visit to Washington, D.C. He headed there last night. We saw some pictures overnight of him and David Lammy entering the front door of the White House. He's going to see Donald Trump. Maybe he's going to see Elon Musk as well. Is he going to be coming back with anything, or is he just going to be coming back having had his backside handed to him by the 47th President of the United States of America, a.k.a. The head of foreign policy and defence policy in the entirety of Western Europe. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call us on. You can send us a voice note to that number, of course, as well. You can send us a text to 87222. You can find us on X at talkTV. We've had a very exciting week this week for all sorts of reasons, including, of course, because we launched our Home of Common Sense bumper sticker campaign. Many of you will be in receipt of those bumper stickers that you requested over the course of the next day or two. There is, I can reveal to you exclusively, a golden ticket within one of those envelopes, and if you do get that one, you just have to take a picture of it, get in touch with us, and we will tell you what you have actually won. It will be quite remarkable. It is the revolution of common sense. People want them all over the country. Thousands of you have requested them. We've actually run out of them, but we are going to make more, so don't worry. If you haven't got one in this batch, just keep trying and we'll get one out to you as soon as we possibly can. Headlines in the papers this morning: Starmer to confront Trump on Ukraine, it says on the front page of the Times. The front page of the Telegraph. The Times has got, "We need you to hold back Putin," Prime Minister tells Trump. On the front of the Daily Mail, though, the biggest story, I think, about all of it: Starmer set to blow defence billions on Chagos surrender. Yesterday in the House of Commons, Keir Starmer was asked whether or not money from the new defence budget increase, £2.6 2.5% of GDP was going to be used to pay off Mauritius for the Chagos Islands, and he was very, very unsure. He couldn't confirm or deny that that was going to happen. So we'll ask that big question. Are we still flogging off the Chagos Islands, but paying for it as well? Unbelievable stuff. Could be as much as £52 billion over the years. If you've forgotten how to get in touch, by the way, this is how you do it.
Hi, Mike. Great show. Harry from Glasgow here.
Hi, Mike. Lee from Rugby. Great show as ever.
Morning, Mike. Sarah from Croydon.
Good morning, Mike. Great show.
Morning, Mike. Joan from Norfolk.
Hi, Mike. It's Frank from Bingley in West Yorkshire.
Good morning, Michael. Always good to have a spot of Mike Graham in the morning.
Yes, indeedy. We'll also be telling you about what happened around the world last night in a commemoration of that tragic Bibas family who were kidnapped and murdered, including 2 little baby children, by those ghastly creeps, Hamas. The Brandenburg Gate was lit up with commemorative orange light, as was the Empire State Building, as were buildings and monuments all around the world. In London, we didn't get that. Instead, we got a commemoration of the Ramadan lights with Sadiq Khan. Thanks very much indeed. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Let's get back to the main events of the day, though. Rafe Halamanku, very good morning to you, Rafe.
Good morning.
I guess we need to start with the White House. We've got plenty of clips to play for you on various different things. But Keir Starmer over in America finally gets to meet the 47th President of the United States. He's only 4th European leaders to do so, behind Poland, France and Italy. So, you know, he's in the top 5, which is OK.
Just ahead of Zelensky.
Just ahead of Zelensky, who's going on Friday. We've been saying all week, isn't it interesting that, you know, all the naysayers last week who were telling us that Zelensky was being rowed out of the process, and wasn't it shameful and disgraceful that Donald Trump was using his own narcissism to sort of, you know, suck up to Vladimir Putin. It all seems to be working out pretty well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, you know, it may be that investing in Ukraine, putting American workers there, may be an economic guarantee where they won't provide a security guarantee. Right. But I mean, I think the big question we're all dying to know today is Keir Starmer going to hold Donald Trump's hand?
Yes.
Like Theresa May?
Well, Donald Trump does have a habit, doesn't he, of grabbing people's hands and sort of holding on to them.
Exactly.
And so it may well be that that's what he ends up doing.
And we saw Theresa May squirming. You can just imagine how much Keir Starmer will be squirming. I mean, there's every reason that there was trepidation about this visit because, of course, we had everything we've had from Musk and also from J.D. Vance about free speech in Britain. We had the great issues about Labour Party volunteers going and helping the Democrats in the election. Then, of course, the issues over the Chagos Island. The selection of Mandelson was very controversial.
Yes.
So there's a lot of reason to be a bit trepidatious about this. But yet, at the same time, Trump, well-known Anglophile, has spoken positively about Starmer, which is quite something. Yeah. And hasn't actually said that there'll be any tariffs so far.
Yes.
And that's going to be one of the great issues for this visit. Will Trump actually clear Britain to having 0 tariffs? Because we just found out, of course, that they're going to be applying some form of 25% tariff on the EU.
On the EU.
You still have that hanging over Mexico and of Canada. The thing is, of course, we just had Macron there standing ground with Trump as France's great leader. He's very much an alpha male like Trump is. Yeah. Impossible to imagine Starmer doing what Macron did, interrupting Trump, correcting him, putting his hand on his knee, asserting himself. I'd rather think Starmer will be a slightly different character.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't exhibit any great form of sort of social grace, does he? I mean, he's awkward, generally speaking.
Or presence, or charisma.
Yes, he has no charisma, he has no presence, and he's just generally awkward, and he almost to the point where he doesn't seem to know how to stand or how to sit. I mean, we saw with Macron, he was being made fun of by some Trump fans because Trump made him sit to his right behind the same desk, which made it look like he was sort of his pupil, you know, sort of sitting next to the Grand Master, you know. Whereas, who knows what's the setup
will be outside looking in the window,
Trump
I think.
is very good at this kind of thing, isn't he? Because he knows he's basically a TV star.
Exactly.
He's been on The Apprentice, he ran the show, he knows how to play to the camera, whereas Starmer just looks as if he's kind of never sure quite which way to look or which way to stand.
Well, the great test will be if Trump says something particularly wild and provocative, and Starmer is standing next to him. What does he do?
Right.
Does he try to correct him as Macron did, and then get a slap down from Trump, or does he say nothing at all? And then the Labour Party are going to say, "Well, you've got no spine. You're a weak poodle."
Yes, I mean there are all sorts of dangers in this thing. Let's kick off with David Lammy. He was talking last night about the Chagos Islands because this is going to be a big thing, I think, today. It may well be one of the main things that they end up talking about. Here's David Lammy explaining what will happen coming up.
On a military level and an intelligence level, we're very intertwined with the United States. We struck a deal. After striking that deal, there was a change of government in Mauritius, and the new government in Mauritius had to have time to look at the deal, and there has been a change of government here in the United States, and the United States administration have had time to look at the deal. I still believe it's the best deal.
But does President Trump have a veto?
Well, if President Trump doesn't like the deal will not go forward. And the reason for that is because we have a shared military and intelligence interest with the United States. And of course they've got to be happy with the deal or there is no deal.
It's not exactly holding any kind of line, that, is it? So if Trump doesn't like the deal doesn't exist, basically.
Yeah, if you want to see a picture of someone backpedaling in a hurry, it's David Lammy here, who has staked so much of his career on reparation. David Mastermind Lammy, who has staked so much of his career on reparations and on this deal. As I said before, someone needs to remind him, being Foreign Secretary doesn't mean you put foreign interests first.
No.
You should put British interests first. And in this situation, British interests are also American interests.
Yes.
And what this government has done is it's put ideology over Britain's national interest, and it's put this post-colonial decolonisation above sound military and economic sense. And we knew this was going to happen, that he was going to have to backtrack on this, because it's quite simply a disaster for Britain. It's a disaster for America. It strengthens China at a time when we know that America is focusing its efforts on trying to reduce the power of this. This whole deal just stinks.
And if they're talking about ramping up security in Europe and ramping up spending on military equipment and military budgets, then it makes absolutely no sense in that context to then give the Chagos Islands away, where there's an important military base.
Yeah, I mean, they use the Chagos Islands for the attacks in Afghanistan and Iraq. That's what the Americans used it for. Mauritius, we know, is close to an ally of China in many respects. If we just lease that base and give the Chagos Islands, China will be able to install all sorts of things around there. Mauritius is also part of the anti-nuclear weapon treaty, which means you may not even be able to have nukes on those islands as it is. The fact is, we need a bit more of this Britain first type thing we see with America first. You know, Trump wouldn't stand for an ICJ ruling. The ICJ is dominated by people who hate Britain. One of the judges was a member of the communist government who supported Putin in Ukraine. Another one wants us to pay £18 trillion reparations to the Caribbean. We've got to understand these institutions are not the ones that we set up. They are cuckoos in the nest who are running them. We have no obligation to abide by ICJ rulings, and they have no way of enforcing any rulings. And in the past, when an ICJ
it's not even law, it's an advisory judgment,
you can't enforce ICJ rulings. The only ones who can enforce it are the Security Council. And guess what? We have a veto. We're one of the big five on the Security Council. There's no reason we should be even discussing this.
No, exactly. It's absolutely mad. Let's have a look at what Nigel Farage said yesterday in the House of Commons on the same subject.
Who tell us this has to be done because of legal uncertainty. But of course, there is no legal uncertainty whatsoever. And you know, you can shake your heads if you want, but you know I'm right. The ICJ has no jurisdiction over this whatsoever. So why are we doing it?
Absolutely.
And so why are we doing it? It's a very good question. Also, Robert Jenrick's been talking about it and giving the sort of history of the islands, and how at no point really has Mauritius had any claim on it at all.
Well, this is what's so interesting, because what Lammy and the Labour Party are doing is they want Britain to basically feel guilty for having an empire. This is all about decolonisation. They're making Mauritius into the third colonising power. First it was the French, then it was the British. Mauritius has never owned the Chagos Islands. They are 1,500 miles away from the Chagos. People need to understand that. Those islands were uninhabited until the French and the British arrived there. There's no connection there whatsoever. Furthermore, the Chagosians who've lived in Mauritius have been terribly treated. Second-class citizens. They've been
discriminated against.
Discriminated. You know, aid money that went to them was never given to them, was sucked up by the Mauritian government. We've now had the Mauritian president who organised this deal arrested and investigated for corruption charges. The whole thing stinks. And you also now have a law passed in Mauritius, which is like Hong Kong with China. In Mauritius, you cannot criticise this deal or you'll be imprisoned and arrested. Those are the people that Keir Starmer wants to hand over the Chagos Islands to.
Incredible, isn't it? And on the front page of the Daily Mail, historic White House summit is the sort of the strapline. But basically, on the eve of the Prime Minister's critical meeting with Trump, Labour Labour repeatedly fails to deny that a significant chunk of its increase in military spending will fund the sellout of the airbase. Now, this is going to cause a problem in Washington because apparently yesterday afternoon, when this became clear that Starmer might be spending part of his 2.5% of GDP increase on Chagos and giving this money to Mauritius, the White House said, through the sort of back door, I think, through aides to Trump, this is not what the defence budget money should be spent on. The defence budget money in Europe must be spent on defence, not on giving the money away to Mauritius.
And how embarrassing it has to be a foreign country that tells that to the British government. It's common sense. Well, look, quite frankly, we are paying Mauritius to take our property. That's like me paying you to live in my house.
I know.
I mean, there is no logic to this whatsoever.
Like me giving you, it's like me, I said this before, it's like me giving you a car and then paying you to drive it away.
Yeah.
Right? Even though you're supposedly buying it.
And anyway, we're supposed to be on a war footing, apparently, with our new defence spending. During the Second World War, we were spending 7% of GDP on... That's a war footing. Going from 2.3 to 2.5 is not war footing. We need a hell of a lot more money going into the defence budget, and taking it away to give to the Chagos Islands is simply insanity.
It is. It came up at Prime Minister's questions yesterday. Here's Keir Starmer talking to Kemi Badenoch about the defence budget.
Over the weekend, I suggested to the Prime Minister that he cut the aid budget, and I'm pleased that he accepted my advice. Mr. Speaker, it's the fastest response. It's the fastest response I've ever had from the Prime Minister. However, he announced £13.4 billion in additional defence spending yesterday. This morning, his Defence Secretary said the uplift is only £6 billion. Which is the correct figure?
Prime Minister. I'm going to have to let the Leader of the Opposition down gently. She didn't feature in my thinking at all. I was so busy over the weekend I didn't even see her proposal. I think she's appointed herself, I think, saviour of the Western civilization. It's a desperate search for relevance. But, Mr. Speaker, look, if you take the numbers for this financial year and then the numbers for the financial year 27-28, that's £13.4 billion increase.
He's actually wrong there because he's adding 2 years together.
It's £6 billion.
Right, he's putting 2 and 2 together to make 7, which is not quite right. Also, he's been sort of criticised quite heavily there for being unnecessarily harsh on Kemi Badenoch by making fun of it. I don't really care whether he makes fun of
PMQs. I think that's the whole purpose of it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that a lot of the sketch writers have said, you know, other cleverer people would have been slightly less brutal with the put down, trying to make out that she's not relevant at all. I mean, the problem is that Kemi Badenoch is about the only person in the world that actually makes Keir Starmer look quite good.
Week after week.
That's the trouble.
Yeah, week after week, we're hoping she's going to land some good blows against him, and somehow, of all people, this thin paper envelope manages to stay standing after each PMQs.
Yeah, no, she manages to make him look quite clever, which I don't know how she manages that.
And you can see now in the polling where, of all of the shadow cabinets, she ranks one of the lowest, and the top one is Robert Jenrick.
I know.
I think there'll be buyer's remorse going through Tory party members.
I think there will be. We'll come back with some more on what is going on around London, around the country, around Britain, and around the world, of course, because yesterday there was a funeral held in Israel for the terrible victims of Hamas, the Bibas family, 2 little children and their mother. Their father had to bury them because he had been released previously and was waiting for them to come home, and unfortunately when they did come home, they came home in coffins. But we'll tell you how the world reacted and how London reacted coming next.
it feels like there's something else going on, and it's not genuinely about entertainment, and it's not genuinely about like an appropriate storyline, if it is all over our soaps, which I suspect it is. And then when it's sort of in somewhere like CBeebies, you just think, well, this is an agenda, and what is your agenda? Is it sort of sexualization? Is it to totally undermine women? Whatever it is, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever on a CBeebies website.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 21 minutes past 6. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course, as well. Brendan says, Mike, if the Chagos Island deal goes ahead to claw back money from the cost of illegal immigrant costs, we can send them there as a deterrent. Well, very much so. Trump is clever, says Andrew. He'll say, give me the Chagos and I'll give you the lease for 18 billion. Money for old rope. Let's get a voice note from Tim.
Morning, Mike. About Keir Starmer's visit. I'm British, but I actually hope that Keir Starmer has his ears pinned back today. I hope he's humiliated. He deserves everything he gets from President Trump. I know Trump is being kind by saying that he respects Keir Starmer, but we all know this is just a politician's rhetoric. Keir Starmer is probably one of the most hated leaders on the world stage. Everyone thinks he's a joke. Here at home, we just hate the man. We want a new general election. The sooner the better.
Yes, I think the sooner the better would be absolutely right on. Tim, thank you very much indeed. Let's talk about things of a different nature, though. The Bibas family funeral was held yesterday. Shiri, Ariel and Kafir Bibas, the two children and their mother, buried in a single coffin in Israel, in front of a crowd of what looked like several hundred very respectful mourners. Yesterday evening, Paris, the Eiffel Tower was lit up in orange, as was the Empire State Building, as was the Brandenburg Gate, as was indeed a bridge in Budapest in Hungary. In London, however, we didn't apparently decide commemorating that awful event was worth doing, and instead we got Sadiq Khan unveiling the Ramadan lights, which I think is about the third or fourth year in a row that he's done that. I think they do it down in the Strand. I think that's where they were last year. And you just wonder, you know, what is it about Sadiq Khan and Britain that can't recognise a tragedy that's happened in Israel?
Well, we know why that is, don't we? And, you know, it's a horrific story what happened to them. And for us not to be able to mark in a small way with lights, right, to commemorate and join in the global commemorations
children being
like
murdered,
that.
right?
You know, we get lights put up on the London Eye and elsewhere for gay pride. Yeah. You know, when it's the Bangladesh's national holiday was celebrated with lights and so forth here as well. Even the smallest events, somehow there's some commemoration of them. Yeah. Far too many, we think. Then when you get something so pivotal that's united the world in a horror about this, nothing happens. Instead, what do you get? You get things like, you know, this BBC documentary on Hamas and so forth. You get him, you know, we get this chap just this week had the Israeli flag and the Union flag ripped out of his hands. I saw that. Walking through the streets. And of course you have to wonder whether this is part because of the Labour Party's desire to win back the Muslim vote that they lost at the last election. Of course, there are now 5 MPs with the Muslim vote. And it's almost as if they're scared to in any way cause offence to the Muslim community, even if it means causing huge offence to the Jewish community.
Yes, indeed. And then we get that donut, Gary Lineker, getting himself back into the mix because we know he's now leaving the BBC, not soon enough as far as I'm concerned. He and I think 500 other people wrote a letter to the BBC condemning them for pulling this Gaza documentary, which, as we've previously worked out, is not a documentary. It's a piece of Hamas propaganda, basically, because they used the narrator, a 13-year-old boy boy called Abdullah, whose father is in Hamas. And basically they're trying to make out in this letter that, well, he's not a terrorist in Hamas, though. He's a government minister in Hamas. And you're kind of going, what sort of naivety would you have to have? What sort of childlike understanding of politics in the Middle East would you have to think that you can be in Hamas but not be a terrorist?
Well, I mean, you just have to look at who signed the letter to understand this. I mean, it's a rogues gallery of deluded lovies.
Yeah.
You've got Gary Lineker, you've got Miriam Margulies, Anita Rani, there's someone called Khalid Abdallah, I've never heard of him, and then to wrap it all off, the king of them all, Ken Loach.
Yes.
You know, if Ken Loach is saying something, he's obviously out to lunch and it's wrong.
Yes.
And quite frankly, you know, to interview in this documentary the grandson of the Hamas founder, and not reveal that information.
Right.
And then I just saw a clip on the internet yesterday, actually, of some Muslim woman speaking, and the translation, according to the BBC, was that so-and-so was engaged in fighting Israeli forces, whereas the Telegraph translation said this person was a member of Hamas fighting against Jews for jihad.
For jihad,
And you just think, gosh, the level of disingenuousness to do that, and duplicity in the BBC.
Well, I've actually changed the words that people have said, which immediately, for me, makes it not a piece of journalistic work,
pure propaganda,
not a piece of documentary footage, but actually just pure propaganda. Absolutely unbelievable. Also, one of the cameramen that was used for it was an enthusiastic supporter of October the 7th and the Hamas attacks. And even worse than that was that one of the people who's in it as well is this guy who keeps appearing in all the Hamas propaganda videos as doing various different things. One he's a farmer, another one he's he's a doctor.
He's in hospital.
I think he's been driving ambulances. You know, it's all. I mean, but he appears in every single piece of Hamas propaganda, and he's in this. You know, so that tells you an awful lot. And it's absolutely incredible. Just for good measure, Telegraph's got another piece about the BBC today. Apparently, they're now paying the Taliban to broadcast in Afghanistan. I mean, is there anything these people can get right? I mean, at what meeting do you go to at the BBC and somebody says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pay the Taliban, basically, to broadcast the BBC. And they'll no doubt probably convince themselves that this is by way of spreading the great BBC work to people who perhaps are downtrodden.
If there's one thing they need to have in there is Woman's Hour.
Yeah,
people
and
moaning
Doctor
about
Who.
Doctor Who.
Doctor Who for the Taliban.
But
come on.
Yeah, it's because, the Taliban have banned foreign media, but with this deal, basically, the BBC is going to be paying the propaganda arm of the Taliban. We're going to be funding its propaganda outlet so that we can bring them Gardener's Question Time or whatever we're doing.
Unbelievable. I mean, some of them some of the money apparently goes to house equipment and to keep it sort of secure. But it sounds to me like a bit of a sort of demanding of money with menaces, no doubt. You know, you don't pay terrorist organisations in order to gain access to their country, do you?
Well, and also you know that the Taliban are going to be listening to this to make sure nothing is said that criticises them.
Yes.
So what is the point of something if you're not actually going to try to convert people to your message?
Yeah. It is incredible, isn't it? Here's what a BBC spokesman said. The BBC is editorially independent throughout its programming. Irrespective of the language service, it remains the only international news media organisation still broadcasting inside Afghanistan. Well, maybe it's time they stopped spending money by broadcasting inside Afghanistan, because if they were supposedly doing any good, how come the Taliban are in charge? You know, if the spreading of the great word of the BBC is supposed to safeguard the populace of these countries, how come it's not working?
Well, I would support it if they could send out Lineker there to host, Jihad Drive Hour or whatever they have.
Absolutely, or cricket, in fact, because Afghanistan seems to be quite good at cricket. They managed to beat England at it yesterday. Let's have a look at a couple of other stories on the front pages as well. Royal Jar Wars. It's a different one, this, on the front page of The Sun, just to get away from the more serious political ramifications of most of the stories this morning. The Princess of Wales got in a sticky spot by inadvertently starting a jam war with Meghan Markle yesterday, and she told a young fan about her love of making plum preserve and promised to give the recipes out for free. Now, Meghan, of course, has run into even more sticky quicksand with her new business venture, because every time she thinks of a name for it, the name's been taken by somebody else.
Exactly. And she's come out now with the ingenious name of As Ever, which is the most ridiculous name for... it sounds as if it's full of preservatives. It's going to last forever, this product. But yes, so as always, our glorious Princess of Wales inadvertently showing up the Duchess of Sussex by offering to give out her own jam recipes for free, rather than having to waste all of this money to
Yes.
support the lifestyle of the Sussexes in sunny California.
Yeah, they started off with American Riviera, didn't they, as a nickname for their Santa
right,
Barbara
that failed
sort of
the trademark,
area. That failed the trademark thing, and now As Ever is going the same way, because apparently there's a Chinese company that's got that name on a clothing brand, and there's another American company that uses it as well, so she's not going to be able to use
So
As
it's going
Ever.
to be called Not As Ever.
Not As Ever, yeah, absolutely right. And apparently one of the things that she's going to be selling are mixes for bakery goods, cookie mixes, biscuit mixes, crepe mixes, and these are all trademark applications that she's made in the last couple of years.
Well, this was always her goal.
How the mighty have fallen.
This was always her goal. She always wanted, essentially, to become part of the Hollywood A-list, joining up with, you know, what's
Sort of Martha Stewart,
and that Gwyneth Paltrow and her candles and everything else. She never cared about monarchy. She just used this as a springboard, and now, of course, she's got what she wants, but the problem is nobody wants her products.
I know, absolutely right. We talked a lot yesterday about net zero. We're going to talk about it some more coming up in a moment as well, because the BP story, you know from yesterday, they've decided that going green wasn't such a great idea after all. Aston Martin appears to be following suit as well. Now Rachel Reeves is facing yet another black hole, this time because of electric vehicles. It's all coming up with myself and Rafe after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 6:32. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. By the way, if you have ordered one of our bumper stickers, they are on their way out as we speak, so they should be landing with you today or tomorrow. We have got a massive demand, and we haven't got enough supply. So if you don't make it, if it doesn't get to you, it means you will be getting the next batch, which are being ordered currently, because we've had such a rush on them. Thousands of you want to be part of the revolution of common sense. But when you do pick up your bumper sticker, stick it on your vehicle, take a picture of it, send it to us, or put it out on social media, and we're putting a map together of where everybody is. You'll be pleased to know, which is going to be very exciting indeed. Sean in Gloucester says, morning Mike, as much as I don't want Keith Starling to stay here ruining our lives, I also don't want him going anywhere, embarrassing us with the kiss of death. What will he surrender to Trump? All of our North Sea oil and gas? The man is a robotic moron. Let's get a voice note from Anna.
Morning, Mike. Anna, sorry. Mike, from a female perspective, Keir Starmer isn't making Kemi look small. He's showing himself to be what he actually is, a spiteful, sneery misogynist. That's what women are looking at him and thinking. Kemi, sadly, she is a terrible disappointment. I mean, I admire the woman, but hey, the uni party is over. Time for Nigel, sooner rather than later, please, Mike. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Anna, thank you very much indeed. I think never a truer word spoken. He does come across as a misogynist, and of course, I think it was, who was it that said, it was Rosie Duffield, I think, said that Keir Starmer's got a problem with women. He doesn't really know how to talk to them, and doesn't know how to deal with them, really, and generally speaking is kind of frightened of them. And when we see his many mistakes, and remember his great sort of ridiculousness about Rachel Reeves being the first woman chancellor, when he made that announcement that she was going to be making her first budget speech, and young women and girls will be looking up to her. He had this sort of rictus smile on his face, as if it was some incredible achievement that he'd found a woman with a brain. You know, I mean, he really, I think, is a misogynist.
Yeah, well, it's true, actually, now that you mention
it.
A lot
of lefties are.
It does come across, yeah, amongst the many problems, it is a streak of misogyny in the left. You almost wonder what he would be like on his first date with a girl, because he's got that awkwardness that we're talking about. The awkwardness he has with Trump, with other people in general. Yes. It seems to be amplified when he's around around women.
It is absolutely right. So let's talk about the Green Brigade, because again we had the Climate Change Committee yesterday on the front page of the Telegraph telling everyone we should be driving electric cars, we shouldn't be flying as much. They want to put more taxes on flying. They want to make you eat less meat. They want you basically to put a heat pump in your house and get rid of all gas boilers. It's now been proven by the people that do these sort of calculations that Rachel Reeves will have an £8 billion black hole if those rules are basically followed, because revenues from fuel duty would be so much lower in 2030 compared to 2023 that they'd have no money.
You couldn't make this up. Right. This is such basic economics.
Yeah.
Oh, we rely on fuel duty for so much. Getting rid of cars that require fuel means we'll have less of this money.
Exactly.
It's not rocket science.
It's not
you know,
difficult.
this could be in the back of a matchbox. You can put the stuff out there. And apparently now, of course, there's going to be... Well, and now they're thinking about maybe charging every car mile for mile. However far you drive, that'll be the new fuel duty. Right. Can you imagine the British driver accepting this?
Sadiq Khan has been denying that he's been planning to charge per mile driving in London for about the last 2 years, all the while having asked for consultants to set up a programme to see how it could be done. So there's no question that they're certainly looking into it, and I'm sure that because they've milked the motorists for so many different ways, that's the only way they've got left, that they can do them per mile.
And I'm sure it's one of the calculations people who bought electric vehicles did.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you know, it'll be cheaper for us because we won't have to deal with the fuel duty.
They're incredibly smug, people with electric car vehicles, they say, because it doesn't cost us any money. We don't have to register them for road tax. And you go, well, that's not going to be the case forever, is it? Soon and already now, I think the government is putting some kind of electric vehicle tax on them, which they're going to have to pay. But in more electric vehicle news, Aston Martin has delayed the rollout of its first fully electric vehicle because they just say that the market isn't ready for it. They were going to launch it next year. Now they're saying it's going to be planned for the later part of the decade, which probably means never.
Never, yeah. That's kicked into the long grass, driven into the long grass, yes. I should say. Yeah. We've also had Tesla sales are not doing very well at the moment in Europe as well. And quite frankly, I don't know how they can be in a city like London, where population density is so high. Anything that used to be a house is now 3 flats.
Yes.
How on earth are you going to have sufficient charging for that on a simple London street?
Unless you've got a driveway, and not many people in London do, you know, it's pretty difficult. And a lot of people, if they live in a rural area as well, it's not that easy to put in an electric charging point just for one car. You know, it's quite expensive to do. So, you know, there is no capability around the country for the charging of many more electric cars than they've got at the moment. And so much of the statistical information around them is fake as well, because an awful lot of electric cars are fleet cars. They get bought by companies because they get a tax break from the government. That tax break is going to disappear soon. The actual personal buying of electric cars is way down.
Yeah, now I have to say, I like going in EV cars because they're so quiet.
Yeah.
I mean, mind you, then you get traffic accidents, people can't see a car coming.
Right.
So there are, but I don't think we're there yet where the technology means you can have the rollout. I quite like them being silent and not so noisy. But I think, you know, the idea that we're going to have these by 2030 and change, I think it's for the birds.
I disagree with you entirely. I've got a very noisy car and I like it making a noise. And when I put my foot down, it makes an even bigger noise.
Yeah, that's why I hate it.
Oh, really?
That and motorbikes. I can't stand the noise of a motorbike. Electric motorbikes I would sign up for immediately.
Well, Dale Vince has got one of those. They only cost about 21,000 quid. Turbines on the front page of the Times. This is an interesting one. This is also part of the sort of green agenda. Apparently, now I can't explain this because I'm not an ornithologist or a scientist, but apparently if you paint wind turbines black, birds don't fly into them in quite so many numbers. Apparently Donald Trump was speaking about this, and he was being his usual self. He was saying that there are so many birds getting killed by these turbines in America that the coyotes are getting so fat they need Ozempic, you know, because they're eating that many birds that are coming out of the sky.
Of all the things I knew about Trump, I didn't realise he was a twitcher and an ornithologist.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So apparently DEFRA has been concerned that foraging areas used by seabirds can be very large and that the boosting of offshore wind farms could therefore have adverse impacts on them.
Apparently.
This is, again, why these things are not green. They kill birds at a rate of knots.
Well, we're spending so much money on these bat tunnels and fish discos and everything else that we pay money on, and you have 100,000 birds a year being killed by these turbines.
Yes.
And no one does anything about that. So, yeah, and who'd thought of all the things Trump and Starmer will be discussing, whether you can paint the turbines black.
But it seems, I mean, I don't even know how you would know that. And why would birds not fly into turbines because they're black?
I suppose because white is reflected in some way. Then you have the clouds and everything else. You don't get many black things in the sky, so that's quite easy to avoid.
Yeah, I suppose not. But can you imagine now the cost of all of these wind turbines that have been put up all over the country and sending some poor guy up there to paint them black?
But also,
how long is that going to take?
Then they really will resemble the Eye of Sauron. You know, these black things in the sky just looking down over you.
It'd be horrific.
Quite sinister. The dark satanic mills of Jerusalem,
really will be.
Literally.
Well, if you look at
somewhere,
I mean, somewhere like Dungeness, where there's a whole wind farm, which you can see actually from the cliffs of Sussex, kind of just above Hastings, you can look far off into the distance. That's going to look really, really weird if they're all black. Because when you see them a long way away, it looks quite soothing. You don't like them when you get close up because they make a horrible noise. But if they're black, they will look really awful. That is horrendous.
Sinister.
Yeah. Now here's a good one for those people out there with a sort of a penchant for science. Page 3 of the Daily Mail. Eyes up for a full house. Apparently, the greatest show on Earth, known by astronomers as Planetary Parade, is the unusual celestial event which sees Mars, Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune all lining up in the night sky. Apparently, you'll be able to see all these planets in most parts of Britain, if it's not too cloudy, sometime tomorrow evening. I don't know what happens when the planets align, but I feel like something happens. I mean, is it like the Ides of March or something? Will terrible events befall us, or will something good happen? I don't know.
Well, yeah, Sam will be reading his tea leaves to see how that's going to impact.
Apparently, it hasn't happened since 1982.
Every time one of these things happens, I live in an apartment building and I've got a roof terrace. I go up to the roof, and there's always clouds.
Right.
I've gone every single time, and I never see anything. So,
you can never see it in London, really. There's too much light pollution. But I mean, I'll be in the country, so I may well be able to see something. It feels like it must mean something. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I'm superstitious, but the alignment...
Well, we always say that the planets aligned and then everything went well, right?
Yes.
So, yes, maybe...
That's what we say.
If you're going to buy a lottery ticket, do it today.
Yeah, maybe that's what we should be doing. What else have we got? Where are we? Fly tipping surges to a new record. Daily Mail, page 15. Now, this is entirely due to the fact that councils now no longer bother collecting your bins, and there's some now speaking about only collecting them once a month, as opposed to once a fortnight. So it's not that surprising, is it, that basically fly tipping has reached a record 1.5 million cases last year alone.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is, nobody wants stinking food and other things outside their houses for 2 weeks, let alone for a month. It's unforgivable. I mean, I think we are one of the worst countries in Europe for fly tipping because so little is done by the councils to actually try to enforce stopping of all of this. Yeah. It's a disgrace, and there's no excuse that you're having your rubbish picked up every month, but you would think in an effort to try to change that, they would have a more sensible policy on rubbish collection. But it just goes broader than that, actually. It's more than just councils. This is about antisocial behaviour. Yeah. This is about... No one feels shame in this country any longer. Nobody, you see it with people littering on the streets. Yeah. You see it with graffiti. You see the way people...
their feet on the seats on the trains.
People leaving behind, banana skins and crisp packets on buses and trains. Everywhere you go, no one is shamed and no one feels any obligation to this country. Yeah. That's what you get when you have low social trust. Yes. We used to be high trust societies.
We did.
Where you judge people and people felt ashamed. You don't have that anymore. Right. Our society is breaking down.
I think so, yeah. I mean, more often than not, people are much ruder to one another. They bundle into you. I've noticed an awful lot of times now when you're on a tube train, people get on the train before you've got off. There's no kind of, like stand back and let people get off first. There's none of that. It's all very selfish. And litter's always been a problem in this country, though, hasn't it? I mean, I always used to marvel as a child travelling to Europe and travelling to other countries where littering is not anything like the problem it is here.
Well, litter was a big issue in the 70s and 80s, but from the late 90s, 2000s, we got over it. Yeah. Mass immigration is behind a lot of it because it's simply not in the culture of many parts of the third world to do that. I was just at a wedding in Calcutta, and I went down into the poorer areas for a tour there. And literally, the streets are just piled high. You get this in Africa as well. They don't have rubbish bins. Everything is there. So you can't blame them if they're coming here. They're not taught British manners and style. Yeah. They're going to litter here as well. It's just people are doing what they did back home. And when you have a city like London, which is only 37% white British, you can't be surprised if people are bringing their customs, however disgusting we might find them.
And also, whenever you see a bin, generally speaking, in London, it's
all full up.
Nobody actually bothers to empty it. So that's another big problem as well. Coming up, we've got some more stuff to do. We'll tell you about the NHS, where the Sussex Hospital is apparently looking for a corridor doctor. That's right. You don't get an office, you don't get a surgery, you don't even get a surgical operational room. You just have to walk up and down the corridor helping people who are lying there waiting to die, basically, before they get seen by anyone in the NHS. This, of course, is Morning Glory.
Gary Lineker has just criticised the BBC for pulling its controversial Gaza documentary. The departing Match of the Day presenter was among 500 TV industry figures to sign a letter accusing the corporation of bowing to censorship and racism. This is a surprise. The letter, whose signatories included, of course, Miriam Margolyes, the actress, Anita Rani, the country file presenter, as well as 9 BBC staff,
David
argued
Tennant,
the film
Hugh Grant,
was
Emma
an essential
Thompson.
piece of journalism.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 6:47, with you all the way through until 10 o'clock when Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here. Ray Parliament-Q is here as well. We're going to be looking at a story about the police accessing all of your personal data via your driving licence in a moment. But first, let's go back over to the United States of America because Keir Starmer, of course, is meeting up with Donald Trump today in the White House to discuss, amongst many other things, tariffs on Britain and on the EU, of course, the Chagos Islands deal, and what to do about Vladimir Putin and Ukraine. But here's Trump talking about his fondness for the European Union.
But I love the countries of Europe. I love all countries, frankly, all different. But the European Union's it was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest. The European Union was formed in order to screw the United States. That's the purpose of it. And they've done a good job of it, but now I'm president.
What will happen if these countries or the EU retaliate?
They can't. I mean, they can try.
This was at a massive press conference that was held yesterday where Elon Musk actually was speaking as well. I'm not sure if we've got anything of him. I don't think we have yet, but we will have later in the show, where he's doing this kind of addressing to the entire cabinet in a way which is quite incredible, because he's wearing his MAGA cap. He looks for all the world like a sort of a geeky teenager, but he's the richest man in the world. So you've got to listen to him. And he was talking about Doge and the whole cutting back of American waste, and talking about, I think, saving something like $1 trillion out of the government's budget. It's quite remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. And what it is basically, it's the Trump-Musk show, isn't it? Really, you have to say.
Yeah.
There weren't many people getting much of a look in at that cabinet. Although what an impressive cabinet that was. You look around that; those are alpha male. You can do. Right. We're going to do this. And you look at Angela Rayner and in all the characters we've got around our table. You just think,
I was saying this the other day when Keir Starmer was making his speech about increasing the defence budget, and so over his left shoulder was Rachel Reeves, and over his right shoulder was Angela Rayner, both looking absolutely daggers. And I'm told that they were trying to look serious because it was a serious subject, but they literally looked like the condemned women. They looked as if they'd just been sentenced to death. I mean, it's absolutely horrendous. But here's Trump again talking about the people who have been in receipt of emails from Elon Musk, basically to justify what they've done in the last week to keep their jobs. Here he goes.
People are, right now we're trying to find out who those people are that haven't responded. You had a lot of people that weren't doing their job. They were just obstructionists, and a lot of people that didn't exist, I guess, Lee, too. You found a lot of empty spots. The people weren't there. They didn't exist.
And this is the thing, they found that some people are not responding who supposedly work either from home or perhaps don't work even anymore, because it turns out that an awful lot, and when he was speaking a couple of weeks ago, he was pointing out that people are getting welfare checks who don't exist. They're people who are 200 years old or 150 years old, because the systems are so anachronistic and useless.
And it's remarkable that people on the left are so outraged simply by a request for someone to... If you can't defend your job, say, point out five things that you've done, you don't deserve to have that job. Call me old-fashioned on this. And it's just the same email that Musk put out to his Twitter staff when he had, I think, 80% reduction in staff numbers there. Now, you're not going to achieve that sort of drastic drop in the civil service in America, but surely everybody thinks it's a good thing to cut needless waste. And if people aren't doing a job, if there is no job and people are still getting a paycheck, that needs to be rooted out. I think it's unimaginable you could have an objection to that.
Well, exactly right. And also, it's our money. You know, it's one thing if you could have a left-wing perspective on Elon Musk as a boss and say, you know, the way he treated the staff at Twitter was abominable, but it's a commercial organisation. He can do what he wants, and it doesn't really affect anybody else. But this is our money that we're talking about. You know, and in the case of America, US taxpayers' money. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've enjoyed watching the bleating from the sort of charitable sector about all the money that's been pulled from overseas aid and all the money that Musk has pulled, including Stonewall's money has been taken away, which is a good thing. And they're all as if they're entitled to sort of free money from governments around the world. It's ridiculous.
And let's be clear here, Musk doesn't have the power to just fire people in the civil service.
No.
This is just an exercise to actually see where there are problems and issues. People still have their employment contracts, and all of that still applies to them. So I think there's a lot of misinformation, if I can say, or disinformation going on from the left on this.
On the subject of EV cars, my neighbour has just got an Audi e-tron, says Rob. It is massive. There is no way that this is environmentally friendly. The amount of materials used to make it is huge. It will be killing massive amounts of bugs, ruining our roads and draining our electricity. Yet pays sod all road tax, whilst I pay huge amounts for my smaller van. Absolutely incredible. Well, not for much longer, I think, Rob, is the point about that. Let's talk about the police, because they've been under fire quite a lot this week as well, for all sorts of reasons, but not least because of the Manchester Police going to visit a grandmother who had the temerity to ask for a Labour councillor to resign. That was last weekend. Now, we're told, the Crime and Policing Bill, which came in to sort of view this week, is going to give police the power to access 50 million motorist data held by the DVLA.
Yeah, I mean, this includes, you know, dates of births, photographs, convictions, medical information. Anyone who's in the police will be able to access this, as opposed to now where it's just if there's a road traffic incident that you're being searched for. And this sort of raises fears that essentially you're going to go back to what the Tories wanted to do, whereas if they had cause, you could actually search all the facial recognition of anybody to find out their identity. Now, instinctively, I think all of us will be opposed to this sort of thing happening. But actually, if there are checks on it, I was thinking, you know, shoplifting is such a huge issue in this country. No one's being stopped. The police won't come. But if actually now you have CCTV, we can all see these people stealing. Most of them, hopefully, well, some of them will have driver's license.
Do you think? I mean, this is the trouble.
But the thing is, if there's some check, if you are actually videoed committing a crime, then I think perhaps there should be a way for the police to access all the databases of photographs for that person. But it has to be strict limits. You have to be recorded causing a crime.
Yes, and I think that's the problem with the the Crime and Policing Bill. It's not that clear exactly where the parameters begin and where they end, you know. And certainly Big Brother Watch, who are very good on this kind of thing, so it is disturbing to see this actually happening, threatening privacy rights, including granting all police forces access, opening the door to the creation of a massive facial recognition database. But I can see why. I mean, the trouble is, of course, as as we often say, I mean, I'm told there are at least 1 million drivers driving around in Britain every single day without any insurance. So they're driving illegally. Many people driving without licenses. I mean, many foreign drivers who come here, particularly from Eastern Europe, and you see cars all the time with Romanian plates on or with Ukrainian plates sometimes, you know, and these people don't pay speeding fines, they don't pay parking fines, they don't have to worry about any kind of parking, you know, car offences that they commit because their cars are not registered here.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and it's, you know, you're not going to solve all the issues here. However, I think there actually is some scope for this perhaps to have some useful effect in catching some of these terrible shoplifters and other people who are mugging on streets and so forth, because, you know, we are the most heavily surveilled country in the world, so if people are being recorded doing crimes, if the police won't actually do anything within a few days, at least eventually they can get to these people.
And I guess this has always been the argument why ID cards would be a good thing, because it would mean if you didn't have a driving licence, you would have to have some kind of ID card which would identify you if you were committing a crime. And again, only really if that's what it was used for.
Yeah. I mean, but most people, I think, have a passport, so that information is already logged in some way, I imagine.
Well, apart from the illegals who chuck theirs in the sea, obviously, when they come in, so you never know who they are. Let's talk about the NHS. Story in the Telegraph today. NHS hospital in Sussex, the University Hospitals Foundation Trust, advertising a full-time position aimed at improving care for frail older people, basically stuck in corridors. I mean, if this is not an indictment of the NHS, I don't know what is.
Yeah, this has broken Britain to a T. You know, it used to be quite a proud status symbol to say you were a doctor.
Yeah.
You don't want to be at a party or somewhere. Someone says, "What are you a doctor of?" "Oh, I'm doctor of the corridor."
Doctor of the corridor,
it's like one of those old royal titles from hundreds of years ago. Because we know if people in corridors are far more likely to die than those people who are in hospital wards, particularly the old and the frail are far more vulnerable in corridors. So I think it's a good thing that they will have a doctor who's actually able to try to deal with that to some capacity. But the fact that we've got to this point, you know, there used to be, you remember occasionally there'll be a temporary blip where people were in corridors.
Yes.
Now it's a permanent fixture.
Yes. And it is. And I still wonder, I can never get a straight answer out of anybody, but do you remember during COVID when they removed several beds from every ward and they said that beds had to be further apart because of COVID, which was so ridiculous because, you know, it's an airborne disease. You're in the same room as someone. You know, it's not going to matter how close you are to them. But I wonder whether those beds were ever really put back in the same way as they were, because I'm convinced that one of the reasons that we've got lower capacity in a lot of the hospitals is because they haven't replaced the beds and put them as close to each other.
That very well may be. But look, we were so quick at getting these Nightingale hospitals up and running on a huge scale. I mean, surely they can find some smaller thing to take up the capacity from the corridors.
But every time we talk to people from the NHS, I mean, I spoke to a former health minister yesterday who now sits in the House of Lords, and I said, you know, why is it every year we have the same conversation? Because we've just, you know, they've just fired Amanda Pritchard, basically, the head of NHS England, who was completely useless. But, you know, there will be, this is now the time to make plans to see what it can be improved for next winter.
Yeah.
But you know as well as I do what will happen. We'll get to November and suddenly the warnings will go out that, you know, NHS faces another winter crisis. There's more people getting flu. There's more people getting COVID. There's more people getting norovirus. We've got no room at the inn. You know, there's nowhere to put anybody. And every year it's the same thing. And if you ran a business like that, you'd go out of business very soon.
And as I say, we got the Nightingales up and running in the matter of days. I don't see why you can't do that during the winter period. You can't just have some new place set up for this.
Yeah, it's almost like an overflow hospital scenario where you hire people.
It doesn't seem complicated. Maybe someone can phone in and say why this is a Gordian knot that they can't cut.
Well, exactly. But Wes Streeting talks about, you know, making sure that everything is improved in the NHS, and if he's getting rid of people who don't work, then that's good. But you know, what exactly is he doing to prepare us for the next, you know, the next onslaught of whatever it is that's coming in the winter?
And the thing is, if you get something like the Nightingale hospitals on a smaller scale for hospitals that are overcrowded, you automatically therefore solve the ambulance crisis. Because the problem with the ambulances is they're waiting outside hospitals to check in people who are waiting in the ambulances. They can't discharge them into the hospital until there's a space ready for them. So this would seem to crack both of those issues together.
Right. You would imagine so, wouldn't you? It really is quite remarkable how bad things have got. There's one story we haven't touched on, and you, being an historian, you may have an interest in this. It's on the front page of the Telegraph as well. Lord Ashcroft, who's actually written for the Telegraph, he basically had a gallery named after him in the Imperial War Museum, I think it was, which has been shut down because they've said they want to put something else there, there. But he says basically they didn't even have the courtesy of informing him before the public announcement on Tuesday that they were going to shut down this gallery, which is a £70 million collection of Victoria Cross and George Cross medals.
Yeah, the Victoria Cross and George Cross are our highest medals of bravery. Each one tells a fascinating story of great heroism. These are inspirational stories. All children should go and see these things. Hugely important. This is a woke decision. I went to the Imperial War Museum. They had a huge display on refugees, and they had a huge display on peacekeeping, and that's because of that sort of stuff that we're losing our great heroes from the Imperial War Museum. Quite frankly, I'm still surprised it's called the Imperial War Museum.
No doubt they'll change the name soon to something to do with the suffragettes. Rafe, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Back after this.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in. An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspects in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 7. I'm Mike Graham, and of course, if you are not up yet, you probably should be. The day is upon us. The sun is about to rise in the sky. It's trying to wake us all up with a little light and a little shade as well. It's not raining today, which is nice, but it is still pretty cold. But it's the 27th of February. One day to go until you get, of course, to the 1st of March, which hopefully brings you another step closer to spring. We've got much to talk about this morning and plenty of people to talk to about it. Harry Phibbs is going to join us, columnist at Conservative Home. We'll talk to him about Keir Starmer's trip to Washington. He and David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, made it over there last night. They've got meetings with Donald Trump today, which will be discussed, no doubt, in no particular order. The Chagos Islands, tariffs on Europe, and indeed on the UK, maybe as much as 25%. I don't think that's going to happen to this country, but it may well happen to the Europeans. And of course, what to do about Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky is heading to Washington on Friday, we understand. So he's next in line for an audience with the President of the United States of America. And Donald Trump is pretty much going to lay down the law. We're hearing there on the news that Keir Starmer is going to warn Donald Trump that he must put out security guarantees. Well, I don't think there's going to be any warning going on in the Oval Office. I think Keir Starmer is going to sit there as quiet as a mouse and wait and speak when he's spoken to. And we'll see whether Donald Trump ends up humiliating him or not. I think Donald Trump won't do that. I think Trump will probably be quite nice to him, but he certainly won't be pushed around by him, and he certainly won't be taking any advice from him. Thanks very much indeed. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Let's get a voice note from Kevin.
Morning, Mike. Kevin in Sheffield. So, Keir Starmer's going to America today. I'm quite embarrassed, really, because it'll just show what a sort of a person the British public's voted in. Personally, I don't know why he's going at all. It doesn't represent the British people. He's not a leader on the world stage. I'm really hoping Donald Trump's gone for a game of golf and forgot that he's coming. Great show, Mike. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much indeed. Good one, Kevin. Yeah, I mean, it did occur to me that might happen at some point, that Trump might just take powder and go, oh, sorry, I forgot you were coming. Because don't forget, it was a couple of weeks ago, I think he said, he was asked about Starmer's visit, and he said, yeah, I don't know why he's coming. He said he wanted to talk to me. I'm not sure what we're going to talk about. Obviously, since then, Donald Trump has been brokering this peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. And despite all of the shenanigans and all of the naysayers and the moaners saying that he's taking it all upon himself just to try and get the credit, he's a narcissist, he's sucking up to Vladimir Putin. All of that doesn't matter now because it looks as though the deal is afoot, and Zelensky is going to sign a minerals deal with Trump so that America guarantees that they will not be invaded after the deal is done by Russia. 0344 499 1000. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. A couple of other big stories on the horizon. The BBC in the firing line again. It turns out, according to the Daily Telegraph, that they're paying the Taliban to broadcast in Afghanistan, which seems to me to be another waste of licensed payers' money. This is after we learned this week that £400,000 was spent on a documentary in Gaza, which was nothing more than Hamas propaganda. And, of course, that complete and utter numpty. Gary Lineker has now thrown his hat into the ring. Late yesterday we got the news that he and 499 other industry figures, we're told, I don't know who these industry figures are in TV because it's a pretty motley collection, have basically written to Tim Davie, the Director General, to complain that documentary has been pulled from the BBC's website. It was broadcast a week ago, Monday night. It was then put on the iPlayer, but when it was discovered, in fact, that there was a bit of jiggery-pokery going on with the appointment of the young boy, the 13-year-old Abdullah, who was the narrator of the show, who turns out is the son of a Hamas operative, they decided to pull it. And now Gary Lineker says it's a great piece of journalism. You shouldn't have done that. Well, Gary, first of all, you wouldn't know a great piece of journalism if you fell over it. And second of all, it is the most ridiculous and most irritating judgment I think you've ever made about anything. The people who made the documentary are associated with Hamas. One of the people in the documentary appears in every piece of Hamas propaganda. Sometimes he's a doctor. Sometimes he's a driver. Sometimes he's a photographer. Sometimes he's a journalist. Sometimes he's an injured person. You know, sometimes he's a father. Sometimes he's a brother. He's in everything. And he's in this. So you should know, basically, why. Gary Lineker, you are completely and utterly wrong on this occasion. But let's talk to Harry Phibbs, columnist at Conservative Home, to get his take on the latest situation regarding the Ukraine. Just read you this from Becky in Devon first. Morning, Mike. In regards to Prime Minister's questions, how does Starmer get away with never answering a question in PMQs? Why does the Speaker do nothing? Also, he seemed to just be insulting Kemi rather than the usual PMQs banter. It came across rather misogynistic. She is useless, but it came across as a bit icky. I know what you mean, Becky. I think that is the problem with Starmer. He doesn't really know how to deal with women. As I said, Rosie Duffield has said this. He has a problem with women. Harry, very good morning to you. Good to see you.
Morning.
Shall we have your take on this exchange between Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer? Let's have a look. This is when they were talking about overseas aid.
Over the weekend, I suggested to the Prime Minister that he cut the aid budget, and I'm pleased that he accepted my advice. Mr. Speaker, it's the fastest response. It's the fastest response I've ever had from the Prime Minister. However, he announced £13.4 billion in additional defence spending yesterday. This morning, his Defence Secretary said the uplift is only £6 billion, which is the correct figure.
Prime Minister. I'm going to have to let the Leader of the Opposition down gently. She didn't feature in my thinking at all. I was so busy over the weekend I didn't even see her proposal. I think she's appointed herself, I think, saviour of the Western civilization. It's a desperate search for relevance. But, Mr. Speaker, look, if you take the numbers for this financial year and then the numbers for the financial year 27-28, that's £13.4 billion increase.
There we have Keir Starmer probably at his worst, I think. A lot of people, a lot of women in particular, Harry, saying he does come across as a bit misogynistic there, seemingly very, kind of disrespectful, if you like, of the Leader of the Opposition.
It's patronising, mansplaining, I think the young people call it these days.
Yes.
I think he's a petulant character anyway, so he's probably quite inclined to be dismissive and rude to people anyway. But I think there does seem to be a particular element there.
He's very tetchy, isn't he?
Yeah. I mean, his technique is actually to give an answer and then say, "Look, I've answered the question," and try and get one over on Kevin Baden, not that way. But then invariably, a couple of hours later, the whole thing unravels, and it turns out that the information he gave was false. So this thing, for example, over the figures for the defence spending, the Institute of Fiscal Studies had said that he was playing around with figures because it wasn't an increase in real terms. He was giving a cash increase, and then with inflation, the increase is lower than is being pretended. And then Kemi Badenoch then said, "Oh, by the way, this £9 billion, astonishingly, that the government's proposing to pay Mauritius for surrendering the Chagos Islands, assuming Donald Trump allows this to go ahead, with that £9 billion be coming out of the defence budget." And he was evasive over that, but ultimately, more or less grudgingly conceded that yes, it was. So with all these things, it's not just how much money is being spent, but is the money being spent effectively? Right. If we're spending more on the defence budget and we're just handing billions over to Mauritius, then it's not improving our security.
No, and also it's completely sort of counterintuitive to the policy that they're trying to push. If you're trying to make Britain, safer at home, and you're trying to make us stronger abroad, then giving away the Chagos Islands isn't either of those things, and therefore it's not in tune with whatever their policy is meant to be, is it?
No, I just hope and pray that Donald Trump vetoes it. Obviously, there's a very important American base at Diego Garcia. They're not going to want increased Chinese influence. They're not going to think that we should just take on trust this lease arrangement. We look at what's happened in Hong Kong. That would be very naive. I don't think that Donald Trump. Say what you like about Donald Trump. I don't think he's a softie. I don't think he's naive. I can't see what would be in it for him over this, and so let's hope that there's appalling, unpatriotic decision of the British government to waste billions of our money and to undermine our defence. That the British government's failing to stand up and represent British interests, but let's hope in this case that Donald Trump comes to our rescue.
Well, I think so. I mean, it looks as though David Lammy has finally realised, actually, that this might be one of the worst ideas that he's ever come up with, because it does appear that he's been pushing this because of the decision that was taken in the International Court of Justice. Have a look at what he said last night, about the Chagos Islands.
On a military level and an intelligence level, we're very intertwined with the United States. We struck a deal. After striking that deal, there was a change of government in Mauritius, and the new government in Mauritius had to have time to look at the deal, and there has been a change of government here in the United States, and the United States administration have had time to look at the deal. I still believe it's the best deal.
But does President Trump have a veto?
If President Trump doesn't like the deal will not go forward. And the reason for that is because we have a shared military and intelligence interest with the United States. And of course they've got to be happy with the deal or there is no deal.
And that's the first time I think I've heard any government minister say that. So if Trump doesn't like the deal, it doesn't happen, which seems to me to be a bit of a backtrack, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes, I mean, they were desperately trying to rush to get the thing over before Trump came in, of course. But this, all this, and Kemi Badenoch gave a speech at the Policy Exchange about all this guff about international law and international judgments. And this is an example where it wasn't binding. It was essentially a political thing that had no valid basis. Mauritius had no valid claim. The whole thing was nonsense. And as Kemi Badenoch said, it actually is not just about that we need to look at withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights, but there are a whole lot of other of these international organisations, international treaties we need to disengage from and actually put our interests first and have our national sovereignty. And a lot of people are disappointed, really, that with Brexit that we thought we'd be there, but there's a whole lot of other unfinished business to actually be able to operate as an independent country.
Yes, indeed. And that's the other question that's going to come up about tariffs, isn't it? Because we see Donald Trump is not that keen on the European Union. We've got a clip of him saying exactly that, which we'll play later on in the show. But the FT, they're saying this morning, it could be as much as a 25% tariff on some European goods. And what will Starmer have to play with there if he wants to try and convince Trump not to put any tariffs on anything British?
Yes, and what we've got is because we have got. I mean, this bit of Brexit has been genuine. That we have got our independent trade policy. Had we stayed in the European Union, we'd be in the customs union. Some people like Theresa May and Keir Starmer wanted to have a Brexit in name only, where we would still have been in the customs union, and then we wouldn't have been able to make our own trade deals. As it is, I think if we were to have more free trade with America, if we were to say, look, at the moment we acknowledge that in terms of importing cars, various things, we have all these tariffs and we have higher tariffs than you do our goods. We're very happy to cut tariffs and then if you would please have lower tariffs on our goods, and we basically have a free trade arrangement with the United States of America. I think that could well be viable, and that would then be rather ironic that Keir Starmer would be delivering a very significant Brexit benefit, where the European Union inevitably would be very clunky and take much longer to try and come up with any arrangement, and so that would be a great advantage. But if we do end up with higher tariffs, I think that is very damaging. Free trade is a mutual benefit. It's a great engine of prosperity, and I think it would be appalling if the world sort of plunged into sort of tit for tat protectionism. It'd be very damaging.
Well, I mean, trouble is there are some countries that you may need to be protected from, like China, for example. I mean, because the European Union has pretty much allowed China to destroy the European car manufacturing on mainland Europe. In Britain, car manufacturing is not doing too well either because of a lot of cheap Chinese imports.
I think as far as China's concerned, I think it'll be much harder to see a free trade deal between the United States and China, because it is different there with
but that's what I'm saying. I mean, in those circumstances, you want tariffs, don't you?
Well, I mean, with China is different because there are security interests, and also there is a moral point there that China's using slave labour. Right. So the normal argument about free trade is a mutual benefit and mutual prosperity it doesn't completely apply if you've got a dictatorships, stealing things and trying to get security advantage and operating as a dictatorship over its own people. So I think it's difficult there, but generally we were talking about overseas aid. I mean, generally, free trade is a much better way of generating prosperity around the world and getting people out of poverty in a way that also advances the trading partners, and and compared to whatever we go back in history, 50 years, 100 years, there's much greater prosperity because trade has been driving that. So I think that would be. It's a dangerous time, but as I say, so far as our trade with the United States is concerned, we could actually find that we have better deal. We have more free trade than we do at the moment.
Yeah, my sense is that's exactly what Trump's going to do. Indeed. Thank you, Harry. Thanks very much indeed. Harry Fibsek is a columnist at Conservative Home. Here's one from Rick who says, Mike, what happened to the Nightingale hospitals, the beds, the ventilators and all the equipment? Exactly. And Kevin says, Mike, the reason Nightingale hospitals never worked or will ever do so is because there weren't enough doctors and nurses employed to staff them. Yeah, but the problem is that's from Kevin in Stafford. There could be more nurses, there could be more doctors if they'd only spend more money actually recruiting them, and instead of recruiting people in the NHS who are not required, who are not on the front line of the medicine business, who are not basically involved in anything to do with delivering NHS services. Even Dave agrees. He says, morning, Mike, NHS, just get rid of all the managers. That's the way forward. I mean, you obviously need some managers, but you certainly don't need all of the levels of management that you've got. And clearly, at the end of the day, that's how you fix the NHS. What you don't do is start hiring doctors to work in corridors, for heaven's sake. Let's get a voice note from Chris.
Good morning, Mike. Chris in Epsom. So Starmer's going to meet President Trump today. I'm sure that President Trump will be gracious and nice and polite and accept the royal invitation and then hand him over to Vice President Vance, who box his ears, tell him what's what, and send him home with a flea in his ear. Have a good day.
I think you may well be absolutely spot on there, Chris. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Starmer will get some FaceTime with the president, and then he'll be handed off to one of the lesser crested people in the White House, like J.D. Vance, who, by the way, will run rings around Starmer intellectually as much as anything else. Mark says this morning, Mike, any chance you could read out how to get a sticker? Great show. Well, I'm having a row at the moment because we haven't got the new stickers in yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait until we get the new stickers in, and we're going to give you an email address to send your request in to get one. Because at the moment, as I say, we've got thousands and thousands of people who have asked for a couple of thousand of the stickers. So those have gone out. If you're waiting to see what's in your package when you get it, if you have the golden ticket, you will be very fortunate indeed. There's only one of those. And if you get that, you get in touch with us and see what you can do. We'll let you know what happens next. But basically, we're not asking you to send in any more requests just at the moment until we get a new email address set up, until we can get some more stickers in. But there's a team working round the clock stuffing envelopes. I put a video out yesterday. Even I was stuffing envelopes because there's so many of them to do. So you can join the Common Sense Revolution. And once you do get the sticker, of course, what we want you to do is take a picture of it, stick it on your vehicle or in your front window, wherever you're putting it, and send the picture to us. We'll create an active, interactive map of where the Common Sense Revolution soldiers are, and we'll be able to find out exactly just how much of this country we have got covered. I think we're going to be covering most of it. This is Talk.
we'd still be reliant on fossil fuels for the rest of the century at least. You know that, I know that, anyone who pays any attention knows that. So telling us to move away from that before we have got that replacement technology, which I am very sure human ingenuity will develop at some point, but they haven't yet, we will do that. But until then, if you want us to use fewer fossil fuels and rely on unreliable, insecure, more expensive solar and wind power, you are condemning us to go backwards, not forwards.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:24. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock, of course. This is the home of common sense. We're talking about hospitals quite a lot this morning because, of course, the NHS have just applied for a vacancy for a doctor to work simply and only in corridors. That's in a Sussex hospital. That's how bad things are inside the NHS. Basically, people are so hard-pressed to find space to treat people, particularly elderly people. They're having to treat them in corridors, and I think it's a terrible admission that the NHS is simply not fit for purpose. It's absolutely ridiculous. Gurdeep says, morning Mike, hospitals have used some hospital waiting spaces as prayer rooms for Muslims in and out patients. Why? Please do not forget staff have volunteered to help those in Ukraine. NHS have no priorities. Well, that's the thing. We discovered that, didn't we, this week when Keir Starmer thanked a load of people who are volunteering in Ukraine. It's all very well, but maybe they should be volunteering here, quite frankly. And one from Carl says, morning Mike, we should get the young offenders in prisons to clear the streets of rubbish, and don't understand how our councils think that collection once a month is adequate. That's bin collection for an average family. It doesn't compute with me at all. It's about money, it's about hygiene, and it should be about health. Well, let's talk some more about what's going on in Washington, D.C. today. Keir Starmer meeting up with President Donald Trump for the first time since he became president in the White House, of course. He's the fourth European leader to see him. He's already seen Emmanuel Macron. He saw the Polish Prime Minister. He saw the Italian leader as well, Giorgia Meloni. He's now seeing David Lammy and Sir Keir Starmer today. Let's talk to Sir Gerald Howarth, former Conservative Defence Minister, to see what he thinks of it all. Sir Gerald, very good morning to you.
Well, good morning to you, Mike, as well.
Yes, I mean, good news, I suppose, that Starmer is seeing Trump, but you do wonder whether there's going to be a case of the tail wagging the dog. I mean, I sort of said a bit earlier in the week that it would appear that Donald Trump is now the kind of foreign policy and defence chief of the United Kingdom and probably most of Europe.
Well, the truth is, as has been explained by President Trump, that the United Kingdom and much more especially our continental partners have relied overwhelmingly upon the United States taxpayer to fund the defense of Europe. And he has said, as indeed he said before, as indeed Prime Minister David Cameron said in 2014, it's time that the European members of NATO stepped up to the plate. And the arrival of President Trump for a second presidency, with his very clear intention to reduce America's expenditure on defense, has really shaken everybody up.
He really has. Let's have a look at the debate from yesterday, Prime Minister's questions between the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition about British troops in Ukraine.
He's also said that we should put British troops on the ground in Ukraine. We haven't seen the detail of any proposals. Would his new spending plans allow him to fund this commitment effectively?
She asked a serious question about the security guarantees in Ukraine, and that is extremely important, because the worst of all outcomes, if there's to be a cessation of hostilities, is that it is a short break rather than sustained and lasting peace. And I think that that means there's got to be security guarantees. I've indicated that we will play play our full part. There has to be US backing, because otherwise I don't think it will deter Putin. Not in a position to put details before the House, as she well knows today, but I'll continue down that route, because I want a lasting peace in Ukraine and Europe for the safety and security of Ukrainians, of Europeans, and of course for everybody in this country.
I mean, what hope do you think, Sir Gerald, that Starmer has of convincing Donald Trump to make any security guarantees? He hasn't really got many friends in the room, has he?
I don't know what hope he has got, but I certainly approve of the way that the Prime Minister has responded to this situation. Indeed, I think he's been incredibly polite. I think what President Trump is doing is really quite outrageous. He is rewarding aggression on the part of Russia. The United States siding with long-standing enemies like China, North Korea, and Iran in the United Nations. Was deeply offensive to people like me, and I think a lot of sensible people in this country, and probably in the United States as well. However, that is the reality. I think the Prime Minister
isn't that more about his kind of disdain for the United Nations as a general principle, though?
Well, I've never held out much hope for the United Nations. It's been pretty useless whenever it's been engaged in peacekeeping.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the fact is that the United States voted with some very unsavory countries, and I think that sends a very dangerous message. It sends a message to President Putin in particular that he can do more or less what he wants, because the President of the United States is not going to commit the United States forces to preventing further aggression from Russia. So I think I think the Prime Minister is absolutely right to insist on a backup, a military backup from the United States to provide that security to end the war, which is what President Trump says he wants to do. The war will not end if Russia thinks that it can freeze the boundaries that are now set. And then once he has calmed the United States is out of the picture, he will then seek further aggression in Ukraine, possibly moving west to link up with Moldova, take Moldova, because he has acted with impunity in 2008 when he attacked Georgia, acted with impunity in 2014 when he annexed Crimea, part of Ukraine, which his previous
but that's because nobody did anything.
President Yeltsin and President Clinton.
But that's Sir Gerald, because nobody did anything in 2008 and nobody did anything in 2014. Whereas right now, something is actually happening. And the last time we spoke, you were telling me that he was freezing out Volodymyr Zelensky from the whole deal. And now Zelensky's going to Washington to discuss the deal. And so all of this is a sort of a game of chess, isn't it? And I think it's a bit premature to say that this is how it's all going to end, and somehow Putin is going to be appeased. I think Trump is running the game, and surely at the moment you'd have to say he's winning it, isn't he?
No, I think it's completely chaotic. You're absolutely right.
I don't think it is. I disagree with you entirely. I think it's not chaotic at all.
Mike, you've invited me on the programme, and we've normally agreed on things. We do not agree on this. I think the whole thing has been chaotic. I think the President of the United States has behaved in a pretty contemptible fashion. I think it amounts to appeasement. It has so far amounted to appeasement. What he has said is a lie, that Ukraine started the war, that Russia did not start the war. That is a straightforward lie. Russia moved tanks into Ukraine. Ukraine did not move tanks.
Well, I don't think anybody would
Russia.
disagree with what you've just said, but that's not really the issue, is it? The issue is if you're going to get the war sorted out and you're going to get a peace breaking out in Ukraine, then we're closer to that than we've ever been. And it's no thanks to anybody on this side of the Atlantic that's the case.
If the peace results in 20% of a sovereign state being annexed by a country which has annexed that land by force, abducted its people, bombed its citizens, killed its children, what sort of a peace is that? And do you not understand, Mike, that if Putin gets his way on this, that he will stop there? He didn't stop there after Georgia. He didn't stop there.
Yeah, but I've said about Georgia. Yeah, but Georgia and Crimea the last time, nobody did anything to stop him. Nobody did anything to form any kind of peace at all. So he wasn't. There was no reason for him to stop because nobody told him to stop.
But by appeasing him over this act of military aggression, will not stop Putin's
Yes, but you don't know
intentions.
but you don't know that he's being appeased. This is my point. The point is that the end game hasn't arrived yet. We haven't finished with the negotiations. We don't know yet how it will end up. So to say that he's being appeased is incorrect, because he's not being appeased. Trump may be buttering him up a little bit in order to get him around the table to talk to people about stuff, but it doesn't mean that that's how it's going to end, does it?
Well, that is what it's looking like at the moment. It's looking like appeasement at the moment.
Well, yeah, but last week it looked like Zelensky didn't have a seat at the table, and now he does.
Well, we don't know if he has a seat at the table.
Well, he's in the White House on Friday.
Well, that doesn't constitute having a seat at the table. He's probably in the White House on Friday, so that President Trump, the businessman, can negotiate a deal in which they hoover up vast quantities of rare earth minerals, and other minerals upon which Ukraine sits, in the hope of advancing America's interests, America's commercial interests.
Well, that's all part of the deal, though. The point is if you've got American commercial interests in Ukraine, Russia is not going to invade it. As somebody said last night on Times Radio, you know, if you put a Tesla factory into Ukraine, Putin's not going to bomb it, is he?
Well, we do not know.
But you seem to know that everything Trump does is wrong. I think you're allowing your dislike of him to colour your view.
I haven't said... I have supported some of the things that President Trump has done, but I have been involved in this business with Ukraine for a long time. I was a director of a company farming in Ukraine in the noughties. I was chairman of the All-Party Ukraine group in Parliament. I do know a bit about Ukraine, and I do know about European geopolitical issues. And I can see that we have appeased a man who has set out in 2021 his vision to restore Russia to its kind of Soviet-era borders. And he said in 2021 that Ukraine was part of Russia in complete violation of the Budapest Memorandum, under which Russia, Britain, and the United States agreed to respect the sovereignty, independence, and existing borders of Ukraine. And not only is Putin in violation of that, but if President Trump agrees that Russia should keep some of that land which it has stolen from a sovereign country, Ukraine, then the United States itself is in violation of an agreement which President Clinton, President Trump's forebear, signed on behalf of the people of the United States, leaving...
Well, why is no other Western leader saying any of these things, Gerald?
Well, because they weren't party to that agreement. That was only the United States.
Why are they not being critical of Donald Trump and saying that he's appeasing Putin by allowing him to violate all of these agreements? Why is nobody saying that?
Because I think that they, and I do understand their difficulty. I understand the Prime Minister's difficulty dealing with this man. He is so utterly unpredictable. He is incredibly rude. He was rude to...
yeah, but, you know, we're talking about people dying, Gerald. I think you can put up with somebody being rude if he stops people dying, can't you?
But this makes the assumption it's going to stop people dying.
Well, not doing anything. Not doing anything, which is what the West has done over the past 3 years, has resulted in more people dying. And so the fact that somebody's now doing something...
And Mike, that is completely untrue. The West has done something, but of course it has been... far too little.
Well, it's been far too little. What we've done is we've allowed them to take part in a war which they can't win.
Well, that is not true. If the West had followed Boris Johnson's example...
I'm talking about what happened, not what could have happened.
Well, what could have happened? If we had been more robust at the outset, it would have been possible to contain... It is possible even now. Russia has expended a vast amount of its capital on trying to hold the land that it has taken. It has lost probably hundreds of thousands of its men killed or wounded in battle. Tiny Ukraine has stood up to the might of Russia, depleted Russia's resources.
Well, if they're so depleted... But hang on, if they're so depleted, Gerald, surely they should be easy to contain once the deal is done. You can't have it both ways, can you?
If a deal is done under which 20% of Ukraine seized by force by Russia, then all it will enable Russia to do is to rebuild its military force, reinforce its its sovereignty over that land that it has seized, and then prepare for further aggression. Read what Putin has said. So I believe that it was imperative, and I have said this right from day one, it was imperative that we put as much military aid into Ukraine as we possibly could to drive them out. And I think that...
Well, they've had $300 billion, haven't they? I mean, how much more do you want?
As much as it takes, Mike, because the alternative is that we have a threat on our own borders. And if
that's not
Russia,
true either.
It is true,
You've
Mike.
just told me that they've been denuded of most of their power. So, you know, if they're not in a position to invade Ukraine and win in Ukraine, why would they think they could attack a NATO country with even less power?
Because I've just tried to explain to you, Mike, what would happen is that with the war ended in Ukraine, with 20% of Ukraine in the hands of Russia, it would be in a position to rebuild its military strength. And conscious that the United States, under President Trump, has been prepared to sideline NATO, the force, the treaty which has kept peace in Europe for 80 years, Russia, and not just Russia, but tyrants elsewhere around the world will be emboldened to take further action.
I think we've entered a different era, I'm afraid, Sir Gerald, and I think you're completely wrong. But we're going to stop because we've been going on too long. But thank you, as ever, for talking to us. Sir Gerald Howarth, former Conservative Defence Minister, who I think is so anti-Donald Trump that he can't really see the wood for the trees. I mean, I think this is part of the problem. It's 7:39, though. Coming up, we're going to go across the United States of America and speak to Jeff Pogula, who's in Seattle. We'll find out what people are making of the British Prime Minister in the US of A.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. I'm Mike Graham. This, of course, is the one place to go for common sense. It's the world headquarters of common sense. It's the home of common sense. It is Morning Glory with you every single weekday morning for a glorious hours between 6 and 10. You don't want to miss it. We're going to be playing you a few clips of Elon Musk coming up about there was a big cabinet meeting yesterday in the United States of America. This was the day before Keir Starmer arrived. Let's have a look at Elon Musk addressing the room.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess there was like last week, the president encouraged me via Truth Social and also via phone call to be more aggressive. And I was like, okay, yes, sir, Mr. President, we will indeed do that. The president is the commander-in-chief. I do what the president asks.
It's a remarkable scene, and I mean, it's very, very unusual. This is what I meant when I was talking to Gerald Howarth there about the whole different way that things are being done right now. You know, Keir Starmer's arriving at the White House today. He got into Washington late last night alongside David Lammy. We're going to talk now to Jeff Pogula, who's a reporter at Northwest Radio in Seattle. Jeff, very, very good morning. Welcome to Morning Glory. Thanks for joining us. Just wanted to ask you a bit about America's view of Keir Starmer, because Donald Trump has spent quite a lot of time, as has Elon Musk, in the last sort of few weeks since they've been in power, talking about what a terrible state Europe is in, and they're not wrong, by the way, in terms of some of the freedoms that have been curtailed, some of the reasons why people have been investigated by the police and that kind of stuff. Does anybody know who Keir Starmer is in America?
Well, I think the short answer to that is no. It's cure who, if you ask most Americans. But then I wouldn't put a lot of faith in most Americans in knowing who politicians are. If you ask your average person on the street, they couldn't tell you who their member of Congress is.
Right.
So, political engagement, as I'm sure it is over in the UK as well, is severely lacking compared to those of us who cover it for a living.
Right. No, I guess that's true. But he has had quite a sort of cavalcade of foreign leaders. I mean, he's had Emmanuel Macron this week already. He had the Polish Prime Minister in last week. He's already seen Giorgia Meloni, the President of Argentina, was at the inauguration. He's getting an awful lot done, and he's getting Vladimir Zelensky in on Friday.
Yeah, I mean, this is nothing really unusual for a new president, although this is his second term, a non-consecutive term. Whenever there's a new person taking control of the White House, taking control of the American government, you usually see a lot of foreign dignitaries, foreign leaders coming in, paying their respects, because they all want to make friends with the new leader of the United States. They don't want to be on the bad side of American foreign policy. And certainly with Donald Trump, who, whether you like him or hate him, he's a bit of a wild card, especially when it comes to foreign policy. And I think a lot of that is what you're seeing with all these leaders from Europe and elsewhere coming to the White House.
Yeah, I think so. And there are not many of them going away with very much, though, are they? Because, as you say, it's a bit of a sort of diplomatic dance, I suppose, if you like. That they get the picture, they get the seat in the Oval Office. Emmanuel Macron was having quite a lot of fun when he was there, by the looks of it. But Keir Starmer's a very different kind of individual. He's a bit stiff. He's a bit less charismatic. I don't know whether you've ever seen him operate before, but he's kind of awkward. I worry that Donald Trump's going to probably be quite nice to him, but be a bit patronising, maybe.
Well, keep in mind, too, that regardless of who he may be talking to, whatever Donald Trump does is for an American audience. Yeah. He never is really more in his element than when he's holding one of those big rallies. So everything he does is designed to cultivate that image, whether it's the businessman, whether it's the president, whether it's the deal maker. And I think a lot of this has to do with economic issues. A lot of these meetings, certainly, President Trump has threatened tariffs on a lot of countries, certainly for you guys over in the UK, for our closest neighbors in Canada, who is their biggest trading partner.
Yeah.
I think that's issue number one for most of these world leaders that are coming to Washington.
Right. He's also issued a bit of a clarion call, has he not, for some wealthy people to come and live in the US, a gold visa card program he's talking about. Let's have a look at this.
It's sort of a green card plus, and it's a path to citizenship. We're going to call it the gold card. And I think it's going to be very treasured. I think it's going to do very well. And we're going to start selling, hopefully, in about 2 weeks. Now, just so you understand, if we sell 1 million, right, 1 million, that's $5 trillion, 5 trillion. If we sell 10 million, which is possible, 10 million highly productive people coming in, or people that we're going to make productive, they'll be young, but they're talented, like a talented athlete, that's $50 trillion. That means our debt is totally paid off, and we have $15 trillion above that. And now I don't know that we're going to sell that many. Maybe we won't sell many at all, but I think we're going to sell a lot.
I'm reminded of the sort of the Trump online sales department when you hear that a little bit, don't you? It's kind of I'm not sure, he's being slightly over optimistic there with the numbers, isn't he?
Oh, to say the least. I mean, there's no way you're going to pay off the American foreign debt by selling gold cards to wealthy foreigners who are going to come into this country. What Donald Trump has been able to do, though, is convince some foreign investors to put their money here in the United States.
Yeah.
Even local companies. Apple announced a major investment in production here in the United States rather than outsourcing it. But when you talk about these gold cards, and for those in the UK, in American vernacular, a green card is someone who is a legal resident but not a citizen, someone from somewhere else. A gold card, something that Donald Trump can't create on his own. Immigration policy has to be dictated through Congress. So it's not something that he can just wave a magic wand at. He can certainly pull these numbers out of thin air and fantasize about it, but he'll have to get Congress to get on board with that.
I remember when I lived there, they used to have a green card lottery every so often where you could actually win a green card. And a friend of mine from Australia actually did win one and qualified to live there for the rest of the time. It's quite good. Do they still do that?
You know, I've not been in immigration circles. That's not my area of expertise, but it wouldn't surprise me. But everything with how immigration has changed since Donald Trump has taken office on January 20th, everything's up in the air.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, listen, I look forward to hearing from you again, Joe. Thank you very much, and Jeff. Sorry, I should say Jeff Pogler, there, reporter for Northwest Radio, Seattle, in Washington, talking to us about how pretty much nobody knows who Keir Starmer is in America, which is hardly surprising. In fact, there's probably quite a few people in this country who don't know who he is either. 03444991000. One from Jackie, who says this: on the world stage, Stalin is irrelevant. However, we have a problem here. He has such a huge majority that we may never get rid of this communist government. By now, they should be facing several by-elections, and the police should be looking into Stalin's COVID rule break, all brushed under the carpet. Keep up the good work. Well, yeah, we were talking about that just the other day. And how is it this voice coach woman has just sort of suddenly disappeared into the background? The police are not interested in looking into it because they say it's too long ago. Oh, really? Well, tell that to some of the soldiers who have been prosecuted for what they did during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Hopefully President Trump and J.D. Vance will point out to Keith that there won't be any extra funding for NATO until European countries start defending their own borders and letting God knows who cross them, says Steve in Kimberley, Notts. And Andy from Notts says, we heard 4 years from Labour ago how the evil tourist government were closing down hospital beds. I presume you mean the Tory government. My logic would suggest that if that's the case, there are empty wards somewhere. Why aren't they being used instead of corridors? Or was it all a lie back then? Well, that's the thing. I'm still convinced that they haven't got as many beds in hospitals as they used to have, and they've never really put them back the way they were before COVID. Maybe if you've been to an NHS hospital or you work in one, you can let us know. 0344 499 1000 is coming up to 750. More coming up next.
Let's put the shoe on the other foot just for a second, right? Imagine there was a documentary about life in Israel, and we weren't told that it was voiced by and essentially presented by the son of a Netanyahu minister, right? And we weren't told that. Can you imagine what these people would have said? Ban it, get it off iPlayer, this is ridiculous. This is a huge mistake from the BBC. People like Gary Lineker need to shut up, sit down and be quiet because they don't understand what they're talking about.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 7:52. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10 o'clock. Of course, Julie Hartley-Brewer will be there. Mike in Sussex says, Mike, prediction of the day. It's going to be a good day. The Chagos sale ends today. Keir will blame Trump because he's too soft to say it himself with his lawyer cronies. Well, that's the thing. It looks as though David Lammy is definitely preparing for a little bit of a backtrack by saying if Mr. Trump doesn't like the deal will not actually be done. And that's true. Lots of you got things to say about Sir Gerald Howarth. Sir Gerald seems to forget, says Team Always, that Budapest Memorandum 1994 is essentially null and void as NATO expanded hugely since then, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland in 1999 and 7 more countries in 2004. Tony says, Mike, Sir Gerald doesn't want to answer any of your questions because he doesn't want to give you the correct answer. He's got an agenda of hate for Trump. And one from Del Monte says, oh dear, Mike, I think Sir Gerald needs to pop down to his local pharmacy and pick up some Trump derangement syndrome pills. I think it's terribly sad, isn't it, that people can't see past what they have, they think they have for Trump, which is a sort of hatred of the man himself because he's rude. I mean, how can you say that just because somebody's rude, somehow you can't do deals with them, or somehow they can't do anything right, or somehow everything they do has to be in some way criticised? Let's talk to Chris in Epsom now. He wants to talk to us about fly tipping, because apparently fly tipping is at an all-time high right now because, frankly, nobody's taking the rubbish away. Chris, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. It's this problem has been caused by what was a good idea, but it's gone wrong and it needs to be undone.
Yeah.
The councils, what we used to call tips, are now recycling centres. They only open 3 or 4 times a week.
Right.
You have to have a pass in your car to say you come from that area to be allowed in it.
Right.
Right. Now, unfortunately, my father passed, and I promised to clear some stuff out the house and the garden and that for him.
Right.
So I bought a van. I then applied to the council and paid for a van licence to go to the recycling tip. I took the load there. It was all recyclable. It was all wood and glass.
Right.
And they told me, no, you can't come in. I said, well, I've got a van licence.
Right.
Oh, yeah, but this stuff may be commercial.
Right.
So I said, oh, Christ. I said, all right.
Is that a different licence then?
Let me into the other side, and I'll go in with the commercial vans, and I'll pay for it to be got rid of.
Right.
Oh, no, you can't do that. You need a licence. It takes 6 weeks.
Dear me. What are you supposed to do with the rubbish?
This is the thing. People are going to the recycling centres. They can't get the stuff recycled, so they fly tip it.
Right.
Also, you've got registered rubbish carriers, or recycle carriers. They take the job on and price the job as they pay for the recycling at the recycling centre. But they then offer the job out to other people that haven't got licences,
right,
who then go and fly tip it. The councils need to open up the recycling centres because we're paying millions and millions and millions of pounds a year to clear up the fly tipping that they're creating.
Yes.
With too many rules.
Yeah, exactly right. Because, I mean, I was told this by a friend of mine who was in the sort of the building business, that, you know, it costs a fortune if you're in the building business and you're doing a house and you have to take a load of stuff to the dump, sometimes on maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. It's really expensive to do. So a lot of people can't be bothered, don't want to spend the money, so they'll just go and dump it somewhere else.
I was prepared to do that, but they wanted me to apply for a licence and sit with it all in the van for 6 weeks.
That's mad, isn't it?
Ridiculous. And can I say something else as well, Mike?
Go on, yeah.
All right. I'm a veteran.
Yeah.
Howard wasn't much of a defence secretary when I was in the forces, mate. He wasn't much cop then. He wasn't well thought of then.
No. Well, I was just saying that to the guys here. I mean, I don't remember anything that he did that was particularly worth remembering.
No, well, I remember that we had cutbacks when he was in, and we were buying our own kit. We even had a regimental fund where the regiment would buy certain bits of kit for you if you were getting deployed in certain areas.
Right.
And also on top of that, while I'm at it, Starmer's going to get a really warm welcome today from President Trump. He's going to smile graciously.
Yeah.
He's going to graciously accept this state visit, and he's going to chat about the weather with Starmer, and then he's going to hand him over to Vance.
Yeah.
He's going to slap him up the side of his head and tell him what's what. Chagos is off, and wind your necks in.
Yeah.
And I can't wait for it to happen.
Absolutely right. Me too. One final question, without wishing to ask you to incriminate yourself. What did you end up doing with all the rubbish?
I actually went through 2 layers of management at the recycling centre, and got on to the director of services in the end, and explained to him, and he gave me an exemption certificate. And I had this conversation with him.
An exemption certificate. I mean, what an absolute joke. Chris, great call. Thank you very much indeed. An exemption certificate to throw something away. I mean, what more do you need to know about how ridiculous this country has become? Let's get a voice note from Richard.
Hi, Mike. Richard from Telford. A great interview that you just had with that upper-class twit, warmonger. You're absolutely right. They can't have it both ways. Either Russia is a great threat, or Russia is absolutely got a useless army, which is probably the more the case. And people like him, they just want to carry this war on. In 3 years, they've not put a proposal about peace to try and get things settled, and they're just happy to carry on fighting to the last Ukrainian. If they're so keen on this damn war, why don't they go and sign up with the Ukrainian army and fight themselves, instead of expecting other people's children to go and die? Thanks, Mike. Great show, and well done for holding that idiot to account.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. I mean, it is frustrating, isn't it, when you talk to people like that who are so kind of blinkered. They can't see beyond the wood to see the trees. You know, they can't see what's actually going on behind the scenes. They just want to basically have a go at one man because they don't like the look of him. David says this, morning Mike, Ukraine, if I was Zelensky, I would be so embarrassed to keep wearing those terrible clothes to meet all these heads of state. Never seen a man look so scruffy when meeting these very important people. Unbelievable. Absolutely right. And Andy from Notts says, 2 a.m. in DC, I have a vision of Keith Starling doing some last-minute panicked revision. Yeah, I think that may well be right. And morning, Mike, on the subject of the NHS, streeting is a waste of space. Like all Labour, we are far too overpopulated. NHS is never going to be able to cope. Like everything else in this country, Tory, Labour, Libs, Greens, between them have caused this. Reform Party is our future and nobody else. Coming up in the next hour, Peter Hitchens joins us. I'm sure he'll have something to say about Keir Starmer's visit to Washington, where he used to live. Much, much more besides. This is Morning Glory. See you after the news.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the process, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 8. The sun is up, but it's looking a bit murky out there, I'm afraid. Reporting what I see out the window here at the top of the tower on the 17th floor of News UK's headquarters, the front page of the Daily Mail this morning. A historic White House summit, but it says Starmer is set to blow defence billions on Chagos surrender. Yesterday, at Prime Minister's questions, Keir Starmer was asked whether or not the money for the Chagos Islands giveaway was going to come from the new highly increased defence budget. Is it 6 billion? Is it 13 billion? Is it 17 billion? Is it going to cover the 18 billion they're going to give to the Chagos Islands? Is the Chagos Islands deal just going to fall flat on its face as soon as Donald Trump sees one look at David Lammy and Keir Starmer? All of these questions will be answered, certainly if not in the next 2 hours, in the next probably 5 or 6 hours, because it looks to me very much as though David Lammy is already rowing back on the plan to actually flog off the Chagos Islands in what is kind of a very obscure sell-off deal, because the sell-off deal means that we give it away and we also pay them to take it away, which is not much of a sale, really, is it? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a voice note from Sean.
Morning, Mike. Sean from Grimsby here. So Keir Starmer goes to America today to meet Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump's going to mug him off good and proper. But I'm not really that interested in that. I'm interested in what J.D. Vance says to Keir Starmer. I hope she rips him a new one on free speech and locking people up for tweets and all this type of nonsense. Great show, mate.
Good to hear from you, Sean. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, it will be very interesting. The day that Keir Starmer went to Washington, accompanied by David Foreign Secretary. On Friday, of course, Vladimir Zelensky is going to be there talking to Donald Trump about the possible carving up some minerals deal, which anybody with any brains tells me would take quite a long time to come to fruition. So it's not in any way, shape or form some kind of cash grab by Donald Trump, because if you wanted to take the minerals out of the ground, it would take quite a long time before you saw the profits from something like that. Peter Hitchens is coming up there. He'll probably tell us all he knows about that particular situation, which would be quite a lot. 0344 499 1000. Meanwhile, the BBC, fresh from their Hamas documentary propaganda scandal, it turns out are now paying the Taliban to broadcast in Afghanistan. And they say they've only used the money to pay for sort of safeguarding of their equipment, but really giving money to the Taliban, giving 400,000 to a Palestinian organisation that may or may not have ties to Hamas. I mean, goodness gracious me. Gary Lineker, of course, is on the wrong side of history once again. He's come out and criticised the BBC for taking that piece of propaganda off the BBC website. He says it's a great piece of journalism, which you wouldn't know if you fell over it. 0344 499 1000. We're talking NHS as well. We're talking electric cars. Aston Martin aren't making one anymore. Also, they're going to paint wind turbines black. Apparently it stops birds flying into them. I don't know how it does that, but we'll try and get an answer for you. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Sarah in West Sussex says, Mike, Starmer is going to be on the business end of one very one-sided conversation. He's a bully. An example was broadcast yesterday at PMQs, and I hope his humiliation is broadcast around the world. The Chagos deal, as it is, won't survive the next 24 hours. Glorious. Well, let's get Mr. Hitchens' considered view on that. Peter, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
You are a man that's lived in Moscow and in Washington, so I think you're very well qualified to answer the next question. What's going to happen in the Oval Office when Keir Starmer and David Lammy turn up?
Well, not very much, I don't think, because the great mistake that much of the coverage of these events makes is that the United States regards Britain as particularly important or cares a great deal about what we say or think or do. This is one of the gravest illusions in this country, which really does need to be put to rest, that there is a special relationship between the two countries and that the Americans have a special regard for us. They simply don't. And I watched, when I was in Washington, the humiliation of this country by Bill Clinton over the granting of a visa to Gerry Adams, the Sinn Féin leader, which led ineluctably over the next few years to the defeat of Britain in Northern Ireland and the victory of the IRA. And this is purely done for American domestic political reasons. I don't think Bill Clinton cared very much about Ireland at all, but he did care about the enormous amount of money and support that he'd been getting from Irish America to get him elected and then re-elected. And when they started asking him to pay the price for this support, he just did so like that, without any consideration for us whatsoever. And there you have it. And by the way, if anybody wants to talk about appeasement, I've seldom seen such a blatant piece of appeasement in my life as the appeasement of the Irish Republican Army by the United States, pressing Britain to give in. And I remain pretty much alone in this country in pointing out that that's what happened. I don't imagine you want to divert onto that subject this morning, but that illustrated to me, and I went to live in Washington skeptical about the special relationship. I then spent some months hunting around the District of Columbia, seeing if I could find it. And there was no trace of it. Yeah. And then this thing happened, which made it clear that if there was a special relationship, it was a especially contemptuous one. So I think that there's a lot of people saying this is the most decisive meeting between the Prime Minister and the President in modern times. I just don't think that's true.
No. But I think most of those people that are saying that...
Donald Trump will do what he does regardless of what Britain thinks.
Yeah, most of the people saying that are the sort of people that write autobiographies of Keir Starmer, though. I think they're trying to make him into a slightly bigger individual than he really is, because he's not a particularly big individual. He's very,
Well, he's not, is he? And it's quite striking how there doesn't really ever seem to be any sign of any real conviction or desire or strong feeling that, despite his past involvement in rather fervent revolutionary organizations, he could pass through a room and 5 minutes later you wouldn't really be aware that he'd been there.
Right.
It's quite strange.
He's got no substance to him, really, and I've been quite surprised at that, because, again, for all of the things that we thought that the Labour government would do, I thought they'd do some things that obviously people on the right side of politics wouldn't like. But I didn't think he'd be incompetent. I didn't think as a lawyer he would tell so many untruths. I didn't think he would be so unspecific about things. And I didn't think he'd be so tetchy in exchanges with people that don't agree with him.
Well, you mustn't mistake the public performance for the actual activity. Of course, this has been a very damaging government, particularly to the economy.
Yeah.
And particularly with its clinging to net zero, which continues to do deep and profound damage. And of course, Rachel from complaints continuing to impose taxes upon jobs, which are about to have, I think, a really very, very severe effect
seriously bad
on the lives of many people, and for the worse. So, and of course, Bridget Phillipson, the absolute ultra militant education secretary, going around smashing up private schools for no good reason. So I don't doubt that just because when they talk they sound ineffectual and boring doesn't mean they're not.
Oh no, that wasn't. No, that wasn't. No, that wasn't what I was saying. I knew they'd be doing damage, but I didn't think they'd be quite so incompetent. I mean, Rachel Reeves thought she had a good budget, and nobody in their right mind now thinks that, because of the damage that it's done to the economy.
No, but it's extraordinary how they managed to persuade an awful lot of people that they were a competent government in waiting when they so plainly were not.
Yeah, exactly right. So, I mean, as far as the Ukraine deal so far goes, I mean, again, because you know a bit about the ins and outs of the country, the mineral deal that Zelensky supposedly is going to be persuaded to sign. I was listening to somebody on Times Radio last night on the way home, who was saying, any deal for sort of getting lithium out of the ground and turning it into whatever it is you want to turn it into is a very long process. It takes a very long time. There won't be any sort of immediate, shall we say, dividend of doing this deal. And Trump, it seems to me, is a man that likes immediacy. He likes to get a result straight away. And he also obviously wants to try and guarantee some kind of financial payback from Ukraine.
Well, perhaps so, and obviously that his businessman's property developer's mind might seize upon these things. But it's true that getting stuff out of the ground is a very long process and an expensive one. I think this may be a bit of a side issue. The real difficulty has been, and I've pointed this out before, that neither of the main parties in the war, that's to say the war between Ukraine and Russia rather than the war between Russia and America, and neither Volodymyr Zelensky nor Vladimir Putin can give in. If either of them did so, then it would destroy them domestically. I don't think either would last a week if they actually gave in this war. And this, of course, is the role which now falls to President Zelensky, because his country has turned out to be weaker than Russia, and the level of aid which he'd hoped for from the West has turned out to be smaller than he hoped for. It's actually doing him a favor if he's, as it were, overwhelmed by a greater power and forced without his consent into making a deal which is inevitable, which he can't possibly take responsibility for. And I think that simply looked at from that point of view, it is doing him a favor. I've never actually attacked Mr. Zelensky, who, as you recall, began his time in office trying to make peace and was destroyed by his own supposed political allies who prevented him from doing so. And I think his bearing during all this has actually been quite creditable. So I won't attack him. It's a miserable position to be in, and I think it would be horrible for him now to be forced to sit at a table signing a peace deal which he doesn't agree with. So if he's overwhelmed by President Trump, that gets him off that hook. But the interesting thing here is that the people who've really given up fighting are the United States, who've realized that there's nothing in it for them, that the policy which they've pursued now for about 30 years of not allowing Russia to rise again under any circumstances, and to make trouble for Russia, which reached its apogee in this expansion of NATO eastwards, the war which then followed. That policy has actually proved to be a great waste of time and money for the United States, as so many of its foreign policies are, and they've now dropped it. And so here we are. And here's another crucial point, which I think people need to cotton on to. The reason why Ukraine was chosen for this particular role, as far as I can see, is precisely because Ukraine was not a member of NATO. Therefore, Ukraine could go head-to-head with Russia in a shooting war, and it would not trigger Article 5, and it would not could carry on inflicting punishment on Russia. When it turned out that Russia was, although, as I've many times pointed out, militarily incompetent and far weaker than we say, was able to hold things to a stalemate. That's basically means that the Americans have become bored with this war, as they became bored with Vietnam and they became bored with Afghanistan, and so out they go. And here we are. It's and yet in the middle of this, people keep making all kinds of claims about principle and morality, which I don't think actually have anything to do with what's been going on.
Right. Well, I was talking to Sir Gerald Howarth a few moments ago in the last hour, who's a former Tory defence minister, who was very anti-Trump and really doesn't like Donald Trump to the point where he didn't want him anywhere near any sort of peace negotiations. But he kept saying, you know, we shouldn't be appeasing Putin, we shouldn't give him the chance to have any territory whatsoever. And it seemed to me that he just wanted to continue the war, and he wouldn't really be shaken from that particular point. And he said anyone else would do
him and whose army, who's going to do this fighting, and who's going to pay for it. And also this use of the word appeasement, it's just basically a word which you apply to a form of diplomacy you don't like. But there wouldn't be a confrontation in Ukraine, there wouldn't have been this fighting if the United States had not decided back in the 1990s to break its promises and expand NATO eastwards, which everybody who has any sense knew was going to be dangerous and could provoke trouble. I have to say here, because it's almost a legal requirement now, like those tiny print things you have on the ends of advertisements. I have to say here, I do not condone or support or in any way excuse the Russian invasion. It was a stupid thing to do, but it wasn't a wholly unpredictable outcome of the expansion eastwards of NATO. And I think those who expanded NATO eastwards, at least some of them, knew that it would pretty likely lead to these circumstances. And to call this appeasement, people forget that Ukraine existed from 1991 as an independent country and up to 2014, which is quite a long time. There really wasn't any serious confrontation between Ukraine and Russia because Ukraine remained a non-aligned country. And if Ukraine now returns to the status of non-aligned country, and actually without the quite large areas of its territory which are occupied by people who are Russian speakers and ethnically Russian, who were never entirely convinced by Ukrainian nationalism, there's actually a very good chance of it existing peacefully. And what it seems to me to be important is that those people who actually cooked up this disaster should now do something about rebuilding that demolished country and making good the damage that's been done, so that it can in fact be the advanced, highly educated and prosperous country which it easily could be if people stop using it as a battering ram.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I'm just going to stop you for a moment. There's a bit of breaking news I'm just going to say here. Actor Gene Hackman has been found dead in his New Mexico home alongside his wife Betsy and dog. Police are saying there are no signs of foul play, and it would appear to be some kind of double suicide, which is a
very sad,
shocking story, isn't it?
Well, it's just desperately sad when things end in that way, especially someone who gave so much pleasure to us.
Yeah, he was a remarkable man. Listen, we're going to leave it there. Peter, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, there, columnist of the Mail on Sunday, giving us his view, a much considered view. He also knows Ukraine rather well, very differently from Sir Gerald Howarth, I must say. We'll bring you more on that Gene Hackman story as it happens, but a shocking story. Gene Hackman, a star of many films. Most of you will know exactly who he is. Apparently, this is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he lived with his wife. Found dead, the two of them, side by side, apparently. Betsy as well. They're calling it some kind of double suicide. We'll find out what that's about. He was 95, she was 63. This is Talk.
He will back reform this local elections, but reform shouldn't count on his support beyond that.
It'll be interesting if Dominic Cummings starts to sidle up, because he's a very divisive figure, and it'll be interesting to see how Nigel responds to that. When people were criticising him over Tommy Robinson, I actually thought to myself, well, that actually shows leadership, because I crave in this country leaders who actually do not get deflected simply because somebody criticises them or accuses them of something, or says, oh, you've upset this group of wannabe whatevers, activists.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
8:20, I'm Mike Graham. This is, of course, the home of common sense. And what can I tell you this morning, ladies and gentlemen? We have got a red letter moment because we have got the first car bumper sticker. We've got the first picture in, and it's from Mally. And it says, "Morning, Mike. Welcome to Liverpool. Great show, Mal." And he's got the bumper sticker on the back of his white car. It looks great. We'll put it out on social media as soon as we possibly can. So he is, Mal, the first member of the revolution of common sense. He's got the bumper sticker. It says, "The home of common sense." Quite a nice picture of me as well, if you like that sort of thing. So congratulations, Mal. Welcome to the fight, because that's what we're doing here. We're fighting, absolutely, for common sense. Let's talk to Jack Elsom, Chief Political Correspondent at The Sun. His colleague, Harry Cole, of course, over in the United States of America, probably asleep at this very moment in time, as it's 3:20. I hope he is, anyway, because he's got quite a busy day ahead with Keir Starmer visiting the White House alongside... And no doubt Peter Mandelson probably as well, who's, of course, the new UK ambassador to Washington, D.C. Jack, a very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. If I had a car in London, then that bumper sticker would be on it quicker than a rash.
Well, I'll tell you what, you'd be lucky if you can get one, because we've sold out of them already. Thousands of people are going to join the army for it, but there we are. Listen, we'll keep the next batch in for you.
Thank you.
Big deal for Keir Starmer today. We've just been talking to Peter Hitchens there from the Mail. He said the trouble is, of course, you know, the people around Keir Starmer are obviously trying to make more of this visit to the United States perhaps than they should, because is he really going to be warning Donald Trump? Is he really going to be confronting Donald Trump, as some of the papers are saying this morning? Or rather, is it going to be more like Harry Cole says in The Sun today, how he handles the bear pit is going to be more important, make or break for him?
Yeah, I think that voters who are expecting some sort of Love Actually moment in which Keir Starmer stands up to Donald Trump are going to be waiting a long time. Harry Cole's written a fantastic piece in The Sun today where he lays out the possible bear traps which Keir Starmer could fall into if he's not incredibly careful. And, you know, it's probably most overused cliche in political journalism, but he really is going there walking this tightrope, because we know that there are big differences between the UK Prime Minister and the US President, and whether they are irreconcilable differences, I think remains to be seen. Whether it's on Ukraine, Keir Starmer has been pretty vocal in saying that he wants the US to almost act as a security guarantee backstop in any sort of deal. Trump last night came up pretty quickly after Starmer's remarks and said that he's going to leave that to the Europeans.
Yeah.
But away from Ukraine, you have a load of different fractures between the White House and Downing Street. You have Brexit. Keir Starmer's known to be a supporter of it. Donald Trump's known to be a supporter of it. Keir Starmer wants close relations with the EU. On defence, yes, now Keir Starmer has gone to 2.5%. I set out a timeline for that. Donald Trump is demanding even more. And then there's all sorts of other issues, whether it's on China, whether it's on Chagos. And so I think that Keir Starmer is going to go over there. He is going to be smiling. He's going to be fawning. He's going to be falling over himself to try and ingratiate himself with the new president. I think he will put his case forward. But remember, even though there are two people in the room and they are roughly the same size, the power dynamic there is totally imbalanced. And Donald Trump and the United States is obviously much more powerful than we are in this situation. Doesn't mean that we can't often, make our case forward and stick up for our values. But it is going to be tricky for Keir Starmer today.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people saying to me as well, a lot of our viewers and listeners who are keen observers of Donald Trump and how he operates, say that, there's going to be a very nicey kind of sit down in the Oval Office, pictures, a little chit-chat with the reporters in the room, a couple of handshakes, that kind of thing. And then the real business, I suppose, will get done behind the scenes, where you get J.D. Vance maybe in the room, maybe even Elon Musk. I don't know if there's plans for him to meet Elon Musk, where they have conversations about the nitty-gritty, if you like, of the criticisms that some of those in the Trump administration have made of not just Britain but of Europe as well.
Well, this is what I think every administration is grappling with the new Trump regime, because usually when you have these bilateral meetings, as they're known, they're choreographed by aides in advance, months and months prior. And essentially, it's a boxing exercise, and everything is already agreed. You know exactly what the readout is going to be afterwards, the whole sort of communique, as we say it. And everything is basically as laid out beforehand, and there's no surprises. The difference with Trump is that he is known to be erratic. He is known to sometimes flip out. And he's also known to sort of just say what he thinks in pretty undiplomatic language. And I think that it's going to be difficult for Starmer to be able to maybe get a coherent and agreed position out of both of them. But you're right, there's whole different other issues. I mean, J.D. Vance came to Munich not a few weeks ago and basically stunned the audience of European elites into silence when he told them some pretty hard truths about free speech and migration. Right. Now, whether this gets brought up behind closed doors, we don't know. Whether Elon Musk gets involved, I think remains to be seen. Obviously, Elon Musk's been incredibly vociferous and critical about Keir Starmer in the past, especially over those grooming gangs. He seems to have reined it in a bit in recent months. Whether or not someone in the Trump regime has given him a tap on the shoulder and said, come on, let's give this guy a fair hearing for the time being, if you're going to be part of our administration, I don't know. But there are many headwinds in Washington for Keir Starmer. He's definitely flying into somewhat of a political storm. Yeah. Whether to extend the metaphor even more tortured, he can ride it out on the way back to Britain. Then I guess time will tell.
Absolutely right. I mean, listening to David Lammy speaking last night about the Chagos Islands deal, it sounded as though he was kind of looking for a little bit of a side exit, wasn't he? He looked like he was an off-ramp, as I think they call it in the US, because he basically said, and I think we can play the clip, that if Trump doesn't like the deal, it won't be being done. Let's have a look.
On a military level and an intelligence level, we're very intertwined with the United States. We struck a deal. After striking that deal, there was a change of government in Mauritius, and the new government in Mauritius had to have time to look at the deal. And there has been a change of government here in the United States, and the United States administration have had time to look at the deal. I still believe it's the best deal.
But does President Trump have a veto?
If President Trump doesn't like the deal will not go forward. And the reason for that is because we have a shared military and intelligence interest with the United States. And of course they've got to be happy with the deal, or there is no deal.
So if Donald Trump says no, that's the end of it?
Yeah, and I think many people in Britain will be hoping he does.
Yeah.
You know, it just goes to show that increasingly our foreign policy is not being set in London, but in Washington.
Yes.
And when Donald Trump almost says jump, we almost sort of said how high.
Right.
And, you know, I think that the Chagos deal is one of those examples. Obviously, we do share that military base in Diego Garcia with the Americans, and so it's probably normal that they would have some sort of say in it. But it would have to be a pretty outlandish U-turn, because they have expended so much political capital. Starmer, Lamy, Richard Hermer, the Attorney General, defending this plan, which is, I think, deeply unpopular in the UK. Even if you've never heard of the Chagos Islands before, the idea that we're giving away sovereign territory for a pretty flaky ICC ruling and then paying billions of pounds for the privilege to do so, I think most people will think is beyond the pale. And one thing I think that many people around you know, Trump will be saying when people around Trump will be saying to the president is, let's get the details in with this, because it's been reported in the past few hours, refusals to deny on behalf of Starmer and himself in the Commons, that this uplift in defence spending could be essentially just funded almost entirely by the money we're giving to Mauritius for the Chagos Islands. Now, if that is the case, they've been very, very guarded about that so far, and they haven't categorically denied it, then they're going down a very, very dangerous road, because they came out and they said, we're going to uplift defence spending. It's incredibly important that we put money into our military. But now there's all smoke and mirrors about what that actually means. And if that money is just simply going into the pockets of the Mauritian Prime Minister, then people will think, well, hang on a minute, this is completely ridiculous and mad, and it's not an uplift in defence spending at all. So they need to clear that up pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I was told yesterday there was some disquiet in the White House over this particular piece of news, because Trump is very clear and has been very clear that any uplift in defence spending in Europe has to be spent on defence. You know, you can't just suddenly go, because this is defence related, because it's got something to do with Diego Garcia, we're going to use defence money to pay off the Mauritians. That's not going to fly in Washington, is it?
No, not at all. And the reason this currently smells quite fishy is because we know that if none of this uplift in defence spending was going to Mauritius, then Keir Starmer would find it incredibly easy to stand at the dispatch box, not once, not twice, but 3 times, and say, no, we are going to be paying Mauritius, but none of that is coming out of this 2.5% uplift. And the fact that he refused to do so 3 times, and then his spokesman continued to refuse to do so in the briefing afterwards, I think goes to show that this is definitely on the table, and it's going to be as unpalatable in Washington as it is back here in the UK.
Yeah, and then of course Zelensky flies in on Friday, so I don't know, I presume Starmer's on his way back by then, so that's the reason that he'll see him. But, you know, this deal is really moving along, isn't it?
Yes, and we seem to have reached a situation where it was going to be completely off the table for the Ukrainians. But, you know, as all negotiations, they seem to have both moved a bit now. I think that there's definitely going to be some minerals deal now. How much of that the US gets a slice of, I think, remains to be seen. But I think that Zelensky is going to be very hopeful of extracting some sort of security guarantees from Trump. There's no point him giving away hundreds of billions of pounds worth of minerals in Ukraine if he doesn't get that backstop, which he so craves, to stop any future Russian aggression or invasion. It's interesting that Trump, you know, he came out yesterday and said that's not going to be an option for him, and he wants the Europeans to do the peacekeeping. But you just think that's probably an opening position from him. And, you know, if he does think that he's going to get a big slice of that minerals pie, which would be incredibly beneficial for the US economy, then I think probably he will budge on that and say, OK, we will put you under our security umbrella. But I think there's a deal to be done, and I don't think Zelensky would be flying out there if there wasn't.
No, exactly right. Jack, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed, Jack. Jack Elsom there talking from the Sun offices. He's the chief political correspondent. His colleague, Harry Cole, the political editor, of course, he's over in Washington as we speak. You'll hear from him, I'm sure, later on this station when the Starmer meeting takes place. One from Jem, I should say, in Redcar. This Starmer meeting with Trump is going to be truly historic. It must be the first time that we have the foreign leader representing our values and our own Prime Minister being against us. God help us. It's an interesting point, Jem. Well made as well. Coming up, we're going to speak to Esther McVeigh, former Minister for Common Sense, but still a woman that talks an awful lot of it. First, though, here's your chance to win 25,000 quid. Time's running out to get involved in our 25 grand competition. Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to win this life-changing amount of money for 2025. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that, but time is running out. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
8:32, more are coming up. A couple of quick tweets for you here. One from Michelle in Altrincham. It'll be interesting to see the body language between Starmer and Trump when they meet. And she says, I can't wait to get my sticker and show it off with pride on my car. Yeah, we've got the first one, Mal from Liverpool. He's out there as the first member of the revolution of common sense. There's his car, there's a sticker on it, the home of common sense. Absolutely brilliant. Joanna from Salisbury says, bumper sticker on a car already. Wow, he's got an early postman. Well, he has. They must be working hard up there in Liverpool, as we know they do. Coming up, let's talk to Esther McVeigh and find out what she makes of it all. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 8:34. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until, of course, 10 o'clock. Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here then as well. It's the 27th of February. I was just looking at a piece of film of Gene Hackman, who's been found dead in New Mexico. We'll bring you news on that, updates on that as soon as we know them. He and his wife found in their home in Santa Fe in New Mexico. Terribly sad. He's 95 years of age. Let's talk to Esther McVeigh, though, because she's a former Minister for Common Sense, so who better to ask about the state of play when it comes to Keir Starmer. Esther, very good morning to you.
Morning.
Good to talk to you. I'm going to ask your opinion as a woman here, because a lot of people have been saying to me the way that Keir Starmer spoke to Kemi Badenoch yesterday in PMQs, and, you know, we're not snowflakes. We know that it's a rough and tumble world and all of that. But people have said about Keir Starmer, Rosie Duffield, I think, said it, that he's got a bit of a problem with women. Let's just have a look at the way he speaks when she puts a question to him.
Over the weekend, I suggested to the Prime Minister that he cut the aid budget, and I'm pleased that he accepted my advice. Mr. Speaker, it's the fastest response. It's the fastest response I've ever had from the Prime Minister. However, he announced £13.4 billion in additional defence spending yesterday. This morning, his Defence Secretary said the uplift is only £6 billion. Which is the correct figure?
Prime Minister.
I'm going to have to let the Leader of the Opposition down gently. She didn't feature in my thinking at all. I was so busy over the weekend I didn't even see her proposal. I think she's appointed herself, I think, saviour of the Western civilization. It's a desperate search for relevance. But, Mr. Speaker, look, if you take the numbers for this financial year and then the numbers for the financial year 27-28, that's £13.4 billion increase.
Are people being a bit too sensitive about this, or they're sort of saying he's a bit unnecessarily kind of mansplainery, if you like?
Well, he doesn't have any humour, and he doesn't have many dimensions, and he's not a great orator. But
right.
What you did see there, he is belittling and he is condescending. But sometimes I've found Starmer doesn't have the answers, and he's not always accurate with his answers.
No.
So hyperinflates his importance and he says, seriously, I can't believe you're doing this, or I haven't been thinking about you, giving him a little time to think about an answer, which frequently, if you look on fact checks, are corrected afterwards.
Yeah.
So Kenny has been right. But I don't think it will wash with people, this sort of condescending tone he is taking. I think it's a bad look. I think it's a bad move, and he'd be better just to give his boring answers, because humour cannot do.
I mean, it's a bit of a small man syndrome thing for me. He's kind of, you know, he doesn't like people asking him questions that he doesn't want to answer. He doesn't like being picked up on things that he's got wrong. He really doesn't like any kind of criticism at all, which is really the mark of a man who's not very sure of himself, isn't it?
Well, I also think he's not in control of his own destiny at the moment, is he?
No.
He's been forced to the table. So things that I've called for, and I bet you Kemi's called for many years, increased defence, cut foreign aid. Well, he's been dragged to that position, which is something he would never have done in a million years, and neither would his party. So I think he's already niggled and slightly angry before he goes into PMQs. And I think some of that anger is not really directed all at Kemi. I think it's to shore in some of his backbenchers who'd be opposed to what he's doing, because actually it's more in line with what Trump's telling him to do, which is more of a right-leaning sort of process and thought process.
Well, this is a funny thing, isn't it? I mean, this is a guy who doesn't appear to have any sort of ideology about him at all. I mean, he's got a very left-wing government. They're doing some very damaging left-wing-driven ideological things to our country, to our economy, to the farmers, to the pensioners, you know, to the state of our nation's finances. And yet he's willing to kind of swing with the wind if he thinks it suits him.
Yes, and you've seen that with both him and Lamy over whether it's foreign aid or whether you now see this real weakness over the Chagos Islands. And basically Lamy saying, oh, well, if Trump tells us it isn't right, we won't do it.
Yeah.
No, hang on. What is your position? And again, it's because they would rather give up those territories. They are internationalists and not looking at the national interest. And so they are weak in saying, oh, it was Trump who told us to do it, Labour backbenchers and supporters. It's not us. And I don't think, actually, Trump will like this weakness. I think he'd at least like to see somebody with a bit of spine standing up for what they believe. And the more you give to Trump, the more he will take. So Starmer, I'm afraid, needs to go over there with his own red lines.
Yes, but I wonder whether he's capable of delivering those lines, because he's usually fluffing them. I mean, normally can't even speak without getting things wrong. We have to release the sausages and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, watching even Emmanuel Macron with Trump, they seem to have a bit of rapport, and you wouldn't have thought that would be the case. But Macron actually looked quite macho when he sat next to him in the Oval Office. I can't imagine Keir Starmer looking macho at all.
Well, I guess he's got more relaxed way about him as Macron. So he did a bit of a bromance thing, holding hands and all of that. No, Starmer doesn't have that. Like I said, he's very robotic, very one-dimensional. But you have to try and use that to his own advantage. He's going to have to pretend that's legalistic or diplomatic. You know, because he can't pretend to be something he's not, and he can't out-Trump Trump. He's got to find his own personality, but there really isn't one there.
There really isn't. Meanwhile, back here, let me talk to you about net zero, because you like a bit of common sense. I mean, some of the stories this week have been absolutely mad, because what I can't understand is why, on the one hand, you've got the Committee on Climate Change, or the Climate Change Committee, as they've generously renamed themselves, who work for basically Ed Miliband, who are now recommending to the department that they're paid by things that they should be doing, like putting more taxes on flights, telling people to get heat pumps, telling people to stop driving cars and get into electric vehicles instead. All of this kind of stuff which is going to save the planet. And then on the other hand, we've got Rachel Reeves cheering on the fact that we're going to have a third runway at Heathrow and another runway at Gatwick. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, does it?
No, and this is where you'll find the inner hypocrisies of the party. Look, Rachel Reeves, with that terrible budget, has bust the country. So she's desperately now trying to find anything that will provide growth. But we all know that Heathrow won't provide growth for many, many years. At the same time, you've got Ed Miliband there, and a lot of them are these net zero zealots. Also we've got to reach these targets in whatever time. So you've got really inattentions there within the party. But again, they've got to realise this isn't going to happen. They're only going to impoverish the UK. We're 1% of carbon emissions. China's 30%, and sort of motoring forward in whether it's manufacturing, whether it's coal production, oil production, and we're getting left behind. And because none of the things that they've brought on board yet are working, like GB Energy, what's that all about? It's another brand that costs $7 billion a year. So they're saying now, gosh, what can we do? So all Labour will fall back to, as they invariably do, is banning things and taxing things. And maybe that's the way he thinks he might meet some of his net zero targets, because he isn't any other way.
Yeah, I know. But as I say, at the same time, they're encouraging people to build more runways and fly more planes. It's a kind of a complete and utter deselection of the brain, isn't there? It's almost like, you know, they're two separate versions of government, because you can't do one and do the other.
No, you can't. But like I said, really, Rachel Reeves has got herself into a real dilemma because of that budget that she did. It's a horror budget, right? And within the Labour Party, you have lots of different tribes. So you've got the Starmer tribe, you'll have the Blair tribe, you've got the Corbynista tribe, and you've got the trade union tribes, and all of them are demanding different things: workers' rights, growth in the economy, net zero. This is going to be a massive headache for Keir Starmer, who always stays out the way. In a way, he's just there, but a weak leader. He doesn't show how he leads the party. He is just sort of pivoted and pushed around by the tribes underneath him, or Trump from America.
Yes, and he sort of likes to defend his mates, doesn't he? Like Tulip Sadiq, who he didn't fire when he should have fired her. She finally resigned like a month later. Jonathan Reynolds, right, a guy who has committed an offence as far as everybody else is concerned by pretending to be a solicitor when he was never a solicitor. He's still hanging around. Nobody's forcing him out. And similarly, Lord Hermer, who is proving himself to be a very, very bad Attorney General with all kinds of conflicts of interest, both monetarily and in his legal history. You know, it's a complete mess, isn't it?
Right. So I think if you dig deeper into that, every one of those should have gone. Jonathan Reynolds should have gone. And let's also think about Mike Amesbury, who's a Labour MP.
Yeah, why is he still there?
They're all there. Well, again, I think this points to a weakness of Starmer within his own party. Those people he's put in his cabinet are his best friends, and he thinks they're shoring him up and providing, you know, the support for him. So he can't remove them when Jonathan Reynolds lied on his CV. Something significant there, breached the 1974 Solicitors Act. He can't remove him. He's got a low-caliber cabinet there because they've all exaggerated the CV. So they're not this high-caliber cabinet. They're quite inferior, but really they're all his friends, and he needs them to keep him in a position. I think we are seeing a crumbling of, I think, the Labour Party within. It might not happen just yet, but you're already seeing the different tribes within the party raising their head.
Absolutely. The skids are definitely under him. I've been saying it really ever since he's been in. One of these days is going to come true. Thank you very much, Esther. Good to see you. Esther McVeigh there. It's 8:45. Got a couple of amazing pieces of news for you. How about this from Doug, who says, Mike, you do know that Sadiq Khan has reprogrammed his ANPR cameras to pick up that bumper sticker of yours, a £50 charge if you enter London. I wouldn't be surprised. And one from Tony in Yorkshire. Mike, so sad to hear about Gene Hackman. He played the Polish general in my favourite movie, A Bridge Too Far. May he rest in peace. Yeah, Gene Hackman, what an absolute colossus of an actor. He's been found dead with his wife Betsy in their home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The police initially are saying that it looks like it might be some kind of double suicide, which would be awfully tragic, wouldn't it? I was watching him in a movie called Mississippi Burning just the other night, which is amazing. He's so good in that as well. But he's been in so many great films, from the French Connection on. We'll have a tribute to Gene Hackman coming up a little bit later on. This is Talk. Simon Danchuk is coming next.
spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time.
Williams who scores, and Spain lead. A shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspects in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 9. I'm Mike Graham. The final hour of the show. We are easing ourselves into it. The sun is up. If you're out there taking your kids to school or making your way home, having done so, you want to keep listening because we've got lots coming up in this hour. Catherine Porter joins us in a little while to talk about net zero and how this government seems to be completely and utterly schizophrenic about the way that it wants to deal with net zero. Because on the one hand, they want to build a new runway at Gatwick. On another hand, they want to build a new runway at Heathrow. On the other hand, they want to form us all into some sort of, eco-warrior type status where we don't fly anywhere, we don't eat very much red meat, we don't eat very much meat at all, in fact. We don't drive around very often unless it's an electric car, and we certainly don't have any sort of gas boiler. We get a heat pump installed instead. We've got BP, of course, making out that they have made a massive error by doing what they thought was green, and they're now reversing it. We've got Aston Martin no longer going to be producing an electric car. The list of things that the Green Brigade have screwed up goes on and on and on. Now they're talking about painting windmills black, wind turbines black, so that birds don't fly into them. I mean, for heaven's sake, we're going to talk to Richard Holden, MP, Shadow Paymaster General. Keir Starmer's in Washington to meet Donald Trump. The paper this morning saying he's going to warn him that he has to give some security guarantees over Ukraine. Really? Keir Starmer warning you? I mean, if Keir Starmer warns you, you just fall about laughing, don't you? He's not the sort of person that's in any position to issue any kind of warnings to anyone, particularly the President of the United States of America. This, of course, is Morning Glory. Have a listen to Jane.
Like Jane from Kidderminster here. Kidderminster Hospital was a fantastic hospital. It was shut down when Labour went into power with Tony Blair. But there's a brand new ward there that's still wrapped in cellophane that's never been used.
Absolutely ridiculous. We hear stories like that all the time. The NHS, of course, are advertising now for a corridor doctor. not a doctor to work in a surgery, not a doctor to work in obstetrics, not a doctor to work in the fracture clinic. No, a doctor to work in corridors, because that's where all the patients are. And I've actually got, I can tell you, from Dr. Renee, our very own doctor here at Talk, a really interesting graph which shows that the number of beds in the NHS hospitals in this country have been absolutely and utterly halved since about 25 years ago. So we'll get stuck into that story as well. This is Morning Glory. Let's get it on. Front page of the Daily Mail this morning says Starmer set to blow defence billions on Chagos surrender. And the big question yesterday that was asked in Parliament to Keir Starmer was, are you going to use this defence budget increase to pay off Mauritius in the Chagos Islands deal, which is such a bad deal that we're giving stuff away and paying people to take it from us? Let's find out from Richard Holden what on earth is going on. Richard, a very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Thanks very much for joining us. I mean, Chagos as a deal will be done and dusted and forgotten about if Donald Trump doesn't like it. David Lammy said as much last night. Does that indicate to you that they're preparing themselves for a bit of a slap in the face?
Well, I should bloody well hope so. It's a terrible deal for our country. The idea, as you said, of giving away British territory and then paying to lease it back. It's absolutely crackers from Sir Keir Starmer and his mate Lord Hermer, who's the Attorney General, the man who seems to have made his millions from trying to sue the UK government on everything under the sun. I think it's absolutely incredible that also, on the flip side, we've got a situation where the government seems to be trying to negotiate via the broadcast media with itself. We've got, obviously, the Foreign Secretary on one side trying to say, oh, no, let's see if President Trump can undo some of this damage. We shouldn't be relying on others. The UK government should realise what a disastrous idea this is and stopping it itself.
Well, somebody said to me today on a rather interesting message that, you know, isn't it strange that we've got a man in the White House who tends to represent our values more than the man who's visiting the White House from the British Prime Minister's office?
Well, look, it's quite clear that there are real concerns around Sir Keir Starmer. Look, I want him to go to Washington and actually go out there and bat for Britain and do the best for the UK, you know. But whether or not he's actually going to do that really remains to be opened. And when you can see things like this sort of announcement around defence spending, which they've been dragged kicking and screaming towards on one side, and then it turns out that, well, as Kemi Badenoch mentioned in the Commons yesterday, you know, well, is some of this money actually going to be used not for our defence, but instead going to be channeled to Mauritius? You know, it really does feel really concerning to me that when, you know, they're dragged kicking and screaming to these positions and then it doesn't actually look like it's all it's cracked up to be. So, you know, we'll have to see what happens. I want to see a deal in Ukraine. I want to see peace there. I don't want to see that war dragging on at all. But, you know, we'll have to very much... The devil is definitely going to be in the detail. And given the way that Keir Starmer has acted over the last few weeks and months around Chagos, given the way he's acting on defence spending, you know, these are very, very concerning issues.
They really are. Let's have a look at what happened yesterday in the chamber. This is Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch talking about putting British troops in Ukraine.
He's also said that we should put British troops on the ground in Ukraine. We haven't seen the detail of any proposals. Would his new spending plans allow him to fund this commitment effectively?
She asked a serious question about the security guarantees in Ukraine, and that is extremely important, because the worst of all outcomes, if there's to be a cessation of hostilities, is that it is a short break rather than sustained and lasting peace. And I think that that means there's got to be security guarantees. I've indicated that we will play our full part. There has to be US backing, because otherwise I don't think it will deter Putin. Not in a position to put details before the House, as she well knows today, but I'll continue down that route, because I want a lasting peace in Ukraine and Europe for the safety and security of Ukrainians, of Europeans, and of course for everybody in this country.
I mean, do you expect him to come back from Washington with some kind of plan of action? Because it seems to me that Keir Starmer's boss now is Donald Trump, who seems to be dictating not only our foreign policy but also our defence policy.
Well, quite. I really have no idea what we're going to see from Keir Starmer. I hope he manages to get something. I hope he manages to make some progress there. But it wasn't that long ago when Keir Starmer was saying any form of, for example, a free trade agreement with America will be a disaster for Britain. Now he seems to have totally changed his tack on that as well. So, you know, the way that Keir Starmer and all of those Labour politicians have attacked Donald Trump, attacked the United States year after year after year, I think, you know, it's going to take a lot of bridge building to try and, you know, get anything positive for the UK from those relationships. And that's what really worries me, I think, more than anything else. We've got a man out there, you know, who you know, can he stand up for Britain, and will he be trusted by the Americans to stand up for Britain after what he and so many of his colleagues, even still yesterday in the House of Commons, are saying about President Trump?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating what Starmer and his crowd of what I would call very much below average cabinet members are doing to this country, because we now get this crime and policing bill, which came out sort of under the radar really much this week. But according to a piece of Telegraph today, the police are going to have access to every driver's personal information via your driving licence at the DVLA. People at Big Brother Watch are very concerned about this, that it's kind of going to be a facial recognition sort of library, if you like, for them to basically identify you in all kinds of different areas. I mean, they seem to be very keen on clamping down on our freedoms, but they don't seem to be very keen on asking us first.
Well, quite, and I think it's just not. This is just the latest in a long line of issues in this space. We also saw them not that long ago. You know, they're trying to reverse all of those protections that we put in the last Parliament around freedom of speech on some of our university campuses, trying to challenge some of those foreign actors, trying to influence and get into our universities. People like China. You know, really concerning issues there. I don't quite understand where the government's going in so many of these different directions. It seems to go off in one of these areas and then have to reverse ferret. And I think that's, Mike, is because actually when it comes down to it, their instincts aren't the instincts that you and I have, which is in the British national interest. Their instinct isn't to put Britain first. It's not always to be on our side. It's not always to think of our country before that sort of ideology that they're constantly trying to ram down people's throats. And I think that's the fundamentals on this, whether it comes to the Chagos Islands, whether it comes to defence spending, whether it comes to, as you mentioned rightly, these domestic issues as well. Their instincts aren't our instincts. I don't think they're the instincts of the British people either. And I think it's becoming very clear that Keir Starmer and his government are becoming unstuck on so many of these issues now.
Right. And they're also running out of money, which is even why we're even more surprised when he's suddenly found some money to send to the defence budget. He's taken it off foreign aid, which I think a lot of us would be applauding him for, actually, apart from people in his own party who think it's a terrible thing. But, you know, they continue to wreck the economy. It's going to get worse in April. Inflation's going up and up and up and up. Yeah. I mean, where's it all going to end?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, and it is a real concern about April. And the reason April's such a big moment is because that's when that national insurance rises really hammers in. I was speaking to, literally in Parliament yesterday, one of my local care providers came in to see me and said, Richard, please, is there any way you can try and influence the government to reverse this? Because for them, you know, actually, a lot of their part-time workers, they didn't have to pay national insurance for until literally it's going to happen in April. So you're seeing massive increases in their bills. A lot of that is being passed on to customers in terms of inflation. A lot of it is being passed on to the taxpayer in terms of actually social care often provided by local authorities as well. So it feels like, you know, they really haven't thought through so many of these issues, particularly these mega tax rises, which are really going to hammer businesses, you know, and I think families in the end, you know, up and down the country, with people paying more and more and more due to the cost of inflation, which are going to be passed on through to people.
Yeah, and once again, another inflation-busting rise in the energy price that you get. The price cap's going up again by 111 quid in April. So, I mean, that promise of £300 as a refund is looking even more and more like a lie. I mean, it gets worse. Old Miliband's nose gets longer every week, doesn't it?
Oh, it certainly does. I mean, Miliband, he doesn't even turn up for Prime Minister's questions anymore. You have a look on the bench, the opposition, sorry, the government from bench now. He's barely there. I think he's absolutely, you know, he before the election, one of their flagship things was we're going to knock 300 quid off your energy bills. Yeah. Now, what we've seen, this is the second big price rise we've seen coming through, and and at the same time, they are also putting our energy security at risk by refusing to expand oil and gas in the North Sea, instead leaving us at the mercy of people, who are not international actors, who've definitely not got our best interests at heart. And it really, it deeply frustrates me that on the one side they're saying, oh yeah, we want to tackle energy bills, we want to make ourselves more energy secure. They talk about it, yet they won't do anything about it. And it really is so deeply frustrating when you see it day in, day out from Labour politicians in the House of Commons.
It is absolutely awful. Good to talk to you. Richard Holden, thank you very much indeed. Shadow Paymaster General there with the latest rundown on the terrible nature of what the Labour government is doing to this country. Stuart says this, Mike, Simon Danczuk's story is very worrying for democracy as the campaign against him was successful. This case will embolden more of them to do the same tactics at the next election. And Vic says, Simon Danczuk receiving death threats from last year, person known to police. Meanwhile, a man has been sent to jail for despicable emails to Jess Phillips and Sadiq Khan posted in the last few months. Well, Simon was just in the studios before the news there, telling us that over a year now has passed since the CPS were given a file which included a video which was made by this individual who sent a death threat to him, included the fact that he'd been arrested, presumably, and the fact that he'd been charged, the fact that he'd been given short shrift, and the police thought that it was worthy of prosecution, and still yet nothing has actually been done. Absolutely ridiculous. Rob says, could we all club in and buy Starmer a gold green card and a one-way ticket? Oops, I forgot it's for people with talent. Yeah, that is the problem, isn't it? Absolutely and utterly ridiculous. Let's get a voice note on wind turbines from Matt.
Hi Mike, interested to hear what you were saying about painting wind turbine blades black. Oh, it's Matthew in Lincolnshire here. If you paint wind turbine blades black, they will get far hotter in the sunshine and they will delaminate. They are, after all, made of fiberglass. There's a reason yachts and other boating implements are always white.
Matt, what a very interesting piece of information. I see. I'm still puzzled as to why it would be that black wind turbines would somehow avoid killing birds more often than white ones would. But as we've just heard from Matt, if you paint them black, that's not going to be good for them either, because actually it will be bad in the hot weather. That's why yachts are white and they're not black, generally speaking. Fascinating. Well, we'll talk to Catherine Porter coming up. She's an independent energy analyst, so she'll probably be able to tell us a thing or two about that. But it just goes to show, once again, the kind of complete lack of foresight, the complete lack of intelligent thinking, of an intelligent thought process to try and get things working properly. David in Cheshire says, is it just me, or is it bloody obvious that if we are so keen to give things away and also need to up our defence, just give the place to the USA and give the billions we were giving to Mauritius to our defence spend, and also write free trade into the deal? Yeah, well, I mean, if you're going to give it away, you might as well give it away to the people that have actually got the base there, Diego Garcia, which is the US of A. You know, Mauritius have got no claim on it whatsoever. Robert Jenrick has made a rather interesting video for 6 minutes long where he talks about the history of the Chagos Islands and how it was never, ever anywhere near Mauritius as an entity. They never had any claim on it. Incredible. Carolyn Shoreham also wants to talk about Simon Danczuk. She says, I just watched your interview with Simon Danczuk and I'm absolutely shocked at what he told us. I can't believe this is happening in our country. We used to have morals, fairness, truthfulness and law and order. This is completely disgraceful and terrifying for Simon and his family. Would you please send him my best wishes of support, gratitude and safety as he goes about his daily life, and I sincerely hope the disgusting culprit will be put away for a very long time. Well, it seems to me the CPS are dragging their heels on it once again. Is it because Simon was representing reform? Is it because the police are woke? Is it because the assailant in question is from a particular ethnicity? All of these questions need to be answered. Nobody wants to do that. Somebody should. It's 18 minutes past 9.
I think they were going to get there before too long, but I'm glad that, in a way, that they've accelerated it. What I would say is that don't underestimate how much of a big decision this is for Keir Starmer, because Labour's instincts are to spend more on foreign aid. When I worked for Ed Miliband, we did a big foreign aid event in the 2015 election. Not sure that won us many votes in the Red Wall. No. It was in Islington as well. And so, you know, the heart and soul of the Labour Party loves a bit of international aid, and therefore to cut it is a really tough decision for a Labour Prime Minister.
Absolutely.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory, 21 minutes past 9. I'm Mike Graham with you until just before 10, when Julie Hartley-Brewer will be here, of course. Max says this Labour government is what happens when you allow the shop floor workers into the boardroom. Good intentions, but just absolutely no idea how to run a business or a government. It is absolutely dreadful, isn't it? I mean, you can't quite believe how bad they are. One here from, let's see, somebody who doesn't give a name, do they? No. Keir Starmer referring to Kemi as she. My mum would have asked him, who's she? The cat's mother? He's so condescending, has zero personality, does not know how to engage an audience, probably because he's always reading anything he says. And don't get me started on his voice. You're fixing the foundations, helping working people to have more money in their pocket. I mean, you know, who knows what Donald Trump's going to make of him. It's going to be a pretty boring encounter for him, I would imagine, after he's still Emmanuel Macron. But we'll bring you more of that later on, of course, because Donald Trump and Keir Starmer meeting up in the Oval Office in the White House. You'll hear it all and see it all live right here on Talk. Also, the sad death of Gene Hackman to report here. Breaking news this morning. Gene Hackman, aged 95, found dead alongside his wife Betsy in their home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The police saying they think it might be some kind of double suicide, which is terribly tragic, of course, in so many great films. We'll talk some more about him coming up in a little while. Let's talk to Catherine Porter now, though, independent energy analyst, one of the few people that speaks absolute common sense, and here we are, of course, at the home of common sense, about net zero and all of the kind of madness that's been going on. And it's been another weird week, Catherine. Very good morning to you. The Climate Change Committee, who, you know, brazenly changed their name from the Committee on Climate Change only recently to the Climate Change Committee, who have fully paid up members of the Net Zero Miliband Brigade. They're paid by the Net Zero Department. They're paid by the government to be a sort of quango, if you like. And then they have the temerity to give advice to the same department on what they should do. I mean, it's all a bit cosy and sort of incestuous, isn't it?
Well, it's very cosy and incestuous. And when you look at the backgrounds of the people in charge, they don't have the relevant experience or knowledge. They have, you know, degrees in things like classics, which isn't exactly the right qualification if you're going to look at something as complex as the energy system.
No, quite. But they've now decided that we all... I mean, I find it very schizophrenic, though, this government, because on the one hand, they've got this lot of net zero nutters telling us that we shouldn't eat red meat, you know, we shouldn't really fly anywhere unless we pay even more tax to do it. We should all get heat pumps. We should all get electric cars. But on the other hand, you know, down the road in the news department at Downing Street, they want another runway at Gatwick and they want another runway at Heathrow.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the source of some conflict here between Miliband and Starmer, because I don't see how these growth plans that Starmer has now can be achieved without repealing the Climate Change Act. And that was Ed Miliband's baby. The Climate Change Act has to go. It's a huge break on economic growth and economic development. And the government will be caught up in legal action for the rest of this parliament if it doesn't get rid of it.
Yeah, and that's the problem, isn't it? Because as we see different parts of the world resetting on net zero, certainly in the United States of America, BP, who suddenly woke up and realised that actually going green and giving up on oil and gas exploration was actually not what they're supposed to do. They're now going to put another 10 billion into exploring for oil and gas. You know, the whole world has realised that net zero is a con, apart from the people who are making a load of money out of it.
Yeah, and I think the UK is really swimming against the tide here. across Europe, we've also seen, and we're starting to see an increasing pushback against net zero, even among politicians that were previously very keen on it. So really in the UK, we're the only people who are still digging in our heels and ignoring this reality. If you look at the Climate Change Committee's report, these are not things the public want. The public is not going to want its cars speed limiting. The public is not going to want to be forced to eat less meat. And I can, I'd be happy to put money on the members of this committee themselves take more than 2 flights a year. So I think this is just unrealistic, unworkable, and it would be hugely expensive.
Yeah.
They're looking at spending something like a net of £33 billion by the end of this decade on net zero. And that's money that could be better spent elsewhere, on defence, for example.
Well, most of the carbon footprints of most of these characters are much bigger than normal people's, because they keep flying off on climate conferences all over the world, don't they? COP29, COP27, COP28, always in places like Brazil or Azerbaijan or, some or Doha. They're all long-haul flights that they take. And in fact, I think I saw the woman who's in charge of the Climate Change Committee being interviewed on Laura Kunsberg a few months ago, and she confessed to only flying when she had to work. And it's like, well, you don't have to fly to Azerbaijan to go to the climate conference. You can do it on Zoom.
And actually, Dieter Helm, who is an energy expert who speaks a lot at conferences, refuses to fly to conferences for that exact reason. He contributes on Zoom.
Right.
If you're going to speak at a conference for an hour, then taking a couple of flights to get there and back isn't really very efficient.
It really isn't. Let's talk about the turbine story as well, because this is a fascinating one in the Times today. Department for Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, say that they're now going to paint wind turbines black. We just had a voice note just before you came on from Matt, who sounded like he knows about these kind of things. Apparently, if you paint wind turbines black, the birds don't fly into them at quite such a high rate. But meanwhile, it will mean that they get a lot hotter, according to him, because white. There's a reason why they're white.
I just can't imagine the logistics of going around and painting all the wind turbines black. We've got 30 gigawatts of wind turbines installed now, many of them offshore.
Yeah.
So how exactly are you going to go and paint all of these things black? It would cost a lot of money. How long will they stay black?
Well, this is the thing. It's typical of the folly of this kind of madness, isn't it? Where and we had Rafe Heidelman-Q in earlier today. Also, if you painted all of those things that we're seeing on screen now black, it would look pretty sinister. And suddenly, the objections which we don't see from people who don't want wind farms. I mean, suddenly I think people would object in even bigger numbers if they were all black. It would look horrendous.
I mean, this is just greenwashing, really, in black rather than green.
Yeah.
I honestly can't think why they're coming up with these kinds of ideas. Wind turbines are just hugely inefficient. They have a load factor on average of 35%.
Right.
We're spending billions on something that only effectively works a third of the time.
Right.
And then billions on stuff to back it up. We've got new wind farms at the moment that get paid more money to not generate electricity than to generate electricity.
Yes. I mean, and we're talking like hundreds of millions of pounds, aren't we?
We are. So collectively last year we spent £9.5 billion on renewables subsidies. We spent another $1 billion on the capacity market, which is back up for renewables. And the Office for Budget Responsibility expects that to quadruple by the end of this decade.
Right.
We're spending an additional $1 billion on curtailment. We're spending an additional £1.5 billion on grid balancing. Untold billions on actually connecting all these things up. The costs that we're paying, and this is every single year. These aren't one-off costs. These are coming year in and year out.
Right.
And the latest subsidy round is certainly going to be higher. The government's consulting on making the subsidies last 20 years instead of 15 years.
Right.
That's pretty much the entire life of a wind farm. And why is it consulting on this? Almost certainly because the industry has said we need higher prices, and it would look very bad on the current basis. So they're trying to find ways to disguise that increase.
And whenever Ed Miliband says that, he can't control the price of energy because we haven't got enough of our own renewables, it's because we're reliant on fossil fuels. That's not true, is it?
Well, I mean, no, it's not true. If you look at gas and electricity price trends since 2000, you'll see that for a long time, up until 2021, wholesale gas and electricity prices were very stable. They were low volatility, but household electricity bills went up and up and up. In 2023, government data show household spend on electricity increased despite a large drop in wholesale prices. what he says just does not correspond with the data. What's making gas and electricity bills expensive at home, and electricity in particular, are all the subsidy costs. It's the cost of the energy transition.
Right.
Yes, we had 2 years of expensive gas, but if we hadn't done the energy transition, we would have collectively saved about £90 billion since 2006, and that would have paid for a few years of expensive gas.
Yes, absolutely right. And meanwhile, Rachel Reeves is looking down the barrel of another nightmare, which is an £8 billion black hole coming if they were to carry out these suggestions from the Climate Change Committee, because they'd lose £8 billion in road vehicle tax, which of course they're going to have to alter, because they're going to have to come after electric vehicle owners as well and say, well, actually, we can't. We promised you that you'd have a car that didn't get road tax, but I'm afraid now we're going to have to road tax it, otherwise we won't have any money.
Well, I think this was inevitable. As soon as a significant number of people were getting electric cars and were being exempt from the tax, that impact would be felt in the Treasury, and therefore they were going to have to do something. So I think that people should have seen this coming, but pay per mile will be very unpopular in this country. Obviously, it's going to penalise people who drive for a living, and I think there'll be quite a lot of pushback. And in fact, I think people would just prefer that everybody just pays road tax in the conventional way rather than moving to a pay-per-mile model.
Well, if they find out it's unpopular, they're almost bound to do it, and they'll probably want to do both, won't they? Double whammy, tax you and make you pay to drive as well per mile, because that's what Sadiq Khan's plan is, I believe. But listen, Catherine, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Catherine Porter, independent energy analyst there, with her description of the nonsense of net zero. The idea that they've got all these wind farms in the sea, right? All of these turbines. Who's going to go into the sea, right? And some bloke in a canoe with a load of black paint to paint them. I got this from Paul in Essex. He says, Mike, I'm just busy painting all my patio doors black so the birds don't fly into them. Car bonnet after that. Yes, exactly. One here from Sally. Mike, Simon Danchuk's story is just horrendous. Death threats. Some of our northern towns seem to be being run by certain communities. It's like the Wild West. Is this the same reason those reporting the grooming gangs are suddenly silenced? I truly hope Simon gets some justice. Well, I hope he does as well. And Neil says, morning, Mike. I would love to get involved in reforming politics, but I live in David Amos's constituency, and for this and the very reason Simon Danchuk cited, I can't justify putting my family at risk from anti-democratic nutters. The lunatics have almost certainly taken over the asylum, and it's a terrible shame. Let's get a voice note from Claire.
Morning, Mike. Claire from the Wirral here. How can the number of beds in the NHS be halved since 25 years ago? Do the governments of this country not understand that with unbridled mass migration and the normal population growth, plus the elderly living longer, that our hospital beds need increasing many, many fold, rather than ending up with us waiting for hours in ambulances and hospital corridors?
Yes, but why is it that back in the 90s there were twice as many hospital beds, approaching 300,000, right, at back end of the 80s and going into the early 90s, and now you've got something less than 300,000, 150,000. So you've actually cut 150,000 beds from hospitals in England over that period of time. Well, is it any wonder you're having to treat people in corridors? Why don't you just go back to the number of beds that you used to have, and that doubles the number of people that can come into hospital beds overnight by 150,000. What's going on? This is Talk. If you want to win some money, have a listen to this. Time's running out to get involved in our 25 grand competition. Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to win this life-changing amount of money for 2025. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that, but time is running out. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Presumably, says Adrian in Wales, they'll now have to paint solar panels black so the birds stop mistaking them for water. Great show as always, says Beverly. Ray, the wind turbines being painted black. How about they paint them bright colours and they'd at least look pretty and might save the birds as well? Well, don't start me with that one, because you know what will happen next. Next it will be the rainbow-coloured wind turbines, and suddenly there'll be LGBTQ plus whatever wind turbines. I don't think that's a very good idea at all. Why don't we just leave them white? How about that? Instead of trying to send somebody out into the sea to paint something that's in the sea and buried very deep in the body of the water, and also how are you going to paint it underwater? Sorry, are you going to paint the whole thing? How's it going to work? It's 9:34.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 9:36. Paul says this morning, Mike, I'm going to repaint my white car, trade it in for a black one, so the seagulls will not crap on it anymore. Ed Miliband is a genius. Yeah, he's not really, is he? And Maximus says, Mike, can I get a sticker, please? Yeah, listen, there are more stickers coming. We've got loads of stickers out there currently being sent out. And in fact, we've already got our first recipient. Mal in Liverpool has got his first sticker, the first one ever that's on the back of a bumper in Liverpool. You got it this morning. We've already put the picture out, so thank you very much. There it is there. If you've got a sticker, stick it on your car. Send us the picture. Send it in. You can either WhatsApp it to 0344 499 1000. Put it on social media if you've got that instead. There's also a golden ticket out there somewhere for some lucky winner. If you happen to, I personally wrote in the letter that you're going to get, you have won the golden ticket. Congratulations. And we'll let you know what that actually means, which will be quite remarkable for all of you. But what we're asking people to do is have a bit of patience, because we need to order more of these things, and they're coming in thick and fast. And then as soon as we've got a load more, we'll tell you exactly how to get hold of one, and we'll send them out to you forthwith. Right now, though, let's talk to Marie van der Zyl, past president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, because yesterday it had to happen, didn't it? Gary Lineker, who's been quiet for a while, to be fair, since he's been told his contract's not being renewed at the BBC. He hasn't been sticking his nose into anything political. But yesterday, the bozo decided to enter the debate about that Gaza documentary, so-called documentary, the BBC put out a week ago Monday. It was called Surviving a War Zone, right? How to survive a war zone. It turns out it wasn't a documentary at all. It was a piece of blatant Hamas propaganda. And since the documentary has been pulled, we've discovered that the cameraman that was used for the movie turns out to have been a supporter of what Hamas did on October the 7th. There's also another guy that appears in the film who is constantly appearing in other Hamas propaganda. We also found out yesterday that not only did the BBC pay £400,000 to the makers of the show, I think a production company called Hoyo, but also they changed the substance of what people were saying to disguise the fact that they hated Israel and wanted to see it destroyed in jihad. So, quite frankly, the last thing you would have expected, really, was Gary Lineker complaining that it had been taken off the website. But that's exactly what he did. Him and 499 other so-called celebrities, including Miriam Margolis, including Anita Rani, including Ken Loach. Well, he would, wouldn't he? Have all written to the BBC to complain that it's a disgusting piece of censorship and they should have left it available for all to see. I'm pretty sure Marie van der Zyl is going to agree with me that was a very, very unfortunate interjection from him. Marie, a very good morning to you.
Morning. It's more than an unfortunate interjection, isn't it? It is, as you say, blatant Hamas propaganda. Yeah. £400,000 they've spent, and they've given the money to a member of Hamas, the family of a member of Hamas. And let's remember the UK has prescribed Hamas as a terrorist organisation.
Yeah.
The BBC, from the start of October 7, of course, refuses to call them terrorists. They only call them military.
Well, this is the thing that really amazed me about the letter that they've all signed, is that in that letter they make out that, you know, this boy Abdullah's father is not a terrorist. He just happens to be the agriculture minister for Hamas, as if to say that, you know, Hamas have got a sort of a non-military terrorist, non-terrorist wing. You know, Hamas is a terrorist organisation. The end. Everybody in it is involved in terrorism.
Absolutely. Look, I don't want any children to die. I don't want anyone to die. But Hamas is a terrorist organisation, and that is the beginning and the end of it. This whole documentary is riddled with problems. The BBC is meant to have impartiality enshrined in its charter. We're meant to trust the BBC. We pay our licence fee, and they have not done any due diligence here. And this programme is not what it says it is. There's no way it should be put back on air. And Gary Lineker and all those people should know absolutely better. This is just not acceptable to pay a terrorist organisation.
It's also not acceptable to call something a documentary and then to tinker with what people actually said, you know, changing the subtitles so that it doesn't sound quite so extreme. So, for example, when some woman talks about a jihad against the Jews, they disguise that phrase and make it into something else, a fight against the Israeli forces.
Worse than that, the word Yehud in Arabic means Jews, and they've changed translation to Israel.
Right.
That's just absolutely outrageous. The Israel bias that has been seen from the BBC knows no end. It goes on and on and on. And I want to know, what processes did the BBC actually go through when they spent this money, they signed off this document, and how much money from the UK taxpayer has gone to a terrorist organisation?
Well, that question has been asked to the BBC and they haven't answered it yet. So we look forward to hearing from them as to how it could have happened. Also, I'd like to know what the process was of the commissioning of this article of propaganda. I'd like to know who okayed the fact that they could change the subtitles and change what was actually said. I'd like to know, you know, how this was even possible to have been made for the BBC and broadcast, you know, in a prime time slot on mainstream television.
About the cameraman, how much money was paid to him as well.
Yeah.
It's not, you know, we are meant to trust the BBC, but clearly we cannot trust them.
No. Turns out they're paying the Taliban as well.
Yes, I read that story this morning. I mean, there does need to be an urgent review of the BBC and its commissioning of programmes. We have to trust the BBC. And when are they going to call these people terrorists?
Right. And also, one thing I wanted to mention to you as well, Marie, was last night in lots of parts of the world, in America, in New York, in Brandenburg Gate, in Berlin, at the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and even in Budapest in Hungary, there were monuments lit up in honour of the Bibas family, you know, that terrible story of the two little children and their mother butchered by Hamas in cold blood. And the husband had to bury them all yesterday in one coffin in Israel. We didn't do anything in London, it seems, as far as I can tell. But what we did have was Sadiq Khan lighting up the Ramadan lights.
I absolutely have to agree with you. The hostages, I can barely get the words out. It's so traumatic. It's so awful. Nobody could surely be unmoved by the butchering of babies. We should have here. Absolutely. There's no question. This is the worst trauma that could have happened to people since the Holocaust, and that funeral yesterday has touched the hearts of everyone. There's a baby. What terrorist organisation even wants to murder a baby? And I heard put in a locked coffin.
Right, I know. It's just unbelievable, incredible. But apparently it doesn't move Sadiq Khan, so he couldn't be bothered, which is a bit of a sad indictment, I'm afraid, of the mayor of what is a great city of Europe. But listen, good to talk to you, Marie. Thanks very much indeed. Marie van der Zil, past president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. Let's get a voice note. Chris wants to say something about NHS beds.
Good morning, Mike. Chris in Northants here, enjoying the show as always. I'm just gobsmacked when you said there that the NHS bed numbers have fallen by, well, a half since the 1990s. I mean, let's consider how much the staff have increased since that time. I mean, the NHS, the National Health Service, in principle, was a good idea when it was invented. But why can't politicians be honest and call it what it is now, an international health service? Because it's opened doors to everybody.
Absolutely right. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Absolutely utterly ridiculous. You know, they're moaning on and on about not having enough space in the hospitals, not having enough beds. But they've reduced them, as I said, by 150,000 since 1990. Why the hell is that? Dan from Kent says it shouldn't be called NHS anymore. It should be called WHS, the Woke Health Service for the World, paid for by UK taxpayers. Alan in Merseyside says, keep well away from Europe, especially with 25% tariffs being placed on it. We'd be mad, but we've got the question dodger in charge here. And one from Wayne who says, my God, all the Western leaders are so jealous of President Trump because he gets things done. He has balls of steel. Look what he's done already. Trump for Prime Minister, I say. Well, he doesn't need to be Prime Minister. He just has to have a Prime Minister who he can boss about. Because, mark my words, Starmer will be getting his instructions when he goes into the Oval Office this day, and he'll probably not come out feeling particularly proud of himself, because he'll have to do what he's told. What else has he got in his locker? The idea that he's going to go and warn Donald Trump about anything is a joke, isn't it? It's 9:45.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Morning Glory. It's 9:48. I'm Mike Graham with you all the way through until 10, which is only about 10 minutes away, by the way. Kevin in Barnstable says, Mike, yesterday more evidence was placed in the public domain that Lineker really is a dimwit. Davey should sack him today to bring some ridicule on him. Well, it's almost as if he's kind of goading the Director General of the BBC. It was almost, I always felt that as well, that he was kind of doing it on the basis that he wanted to try and see how far he could go. And exactly, as you can see, he can continue to go as far as he likes, and Tim Davey doesn't do anything. Let's talk to Robert Bates, the Research Director of the Centre for Migration Control, because just moments ago, the new immigration statistics, which are released quarterly, were released, and we're going to ask Robert precisely what he's found and what's going on. Robert, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. So, what's the look? I mean, it's very complicated, isn't it? The way that they release these immigration stats, and it's all, you know, it always takes a long time to actually figure out where the real numbers are. What have you managed to establish?
Yeah, so they do hide it behind an incredibly complicated spreadsheet. So it looks like migration has fallen year on year between 2024 and 2023. The total number of people that were given a long-term visa, so will be in the UK for the foreseeable future, is, by my calculations, around about 850 to 891,000, depending on how you cut it. So it's a huge number still. The fall is what politicians will be looking to make hay out of course, because the Tory party will be claiming that it's their measures that have brought this down. Labour will be claiming that they've done enough to bring the numbers down. Frankly, it doesn't really matter, because this will still leave net migration around about 400,000 to 500,000 every year, and there is nothing on the horizon at the moment by the Labour Party that would bring things down any further. The main fall is primarily because of those dependents that the Tories in the start of last year, I don't know if you remember, really clamped down on and made it more difficult to achieve a visa for. But yeah, still absolutely huge numbers. Top three countries are India, Pakistan and China as well. So, you know, these are countries that are of a huge cultural distance from the UK as well. So,
and these would be people presumably mostly coming, these are legal numbers, aren't they? People coming on work visas, people coming on student visas. And I think I'm right in saying, you correct me if I'm wrong, they only stopped the dependents coming if you were on a student visa, because if you're on a work visa, you can still bring dependents, I think, can't you?
You can, unless you're on their health and social care visa, which was a ridiculous policy decision that the Johnson government took, which would have allowed any individual coming in to a very low-paid, low-skilled job to bring with them, in some instances, 3 or 4 dependents. So that was basically the Tories reversing a lot of the damage that they'd already inflicted on the country. I think what this really does show, to re-emphasise though, is that this is probably now what we can expect for the next 4 or 5 years. I don't think there's anything really that the Labour Party can do or would be prepared to do to adjust existing visa routes to bring this number down further. So whether we like it or not, this is now our future.
Right. Well, also, Keir Starmer's already making noises at the moment about opening up some kind of EU youth travel scheme, isn't he? So that we could import yet more kind of young people to do the jobs that people in this country apparently don't want to do.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I mean, I don't know where he thinks he's got a mandate for that from, given that the British public clearly overwhelmingly voted for Brexit and then the Conservative Party to deliver Brexit. But this is the kind of high-minded scheme that the Labour Party seem to love. It won't be kind of Bohemian poets or Parisian painters that are coming in on this youth mobility scheme. It will be either low-skilled workers that force out British uni students looking for a bit of summer work, or those in the kind of gig economy, or even really those individuals that come from outside of Europe who have managed to find a back route via that scheme as well.
Well, this is one of the things that people said when we announced that this is what the Labour Party were thinking of doing, that you'd get these people perhaps from North Africa, getting themselves into Spain, getting themselves into Italy, and suddenly finding a legal route to come to the UK. And I mean, it seems like madness to me.
Yeah, so there was obviously during the Brexit negotiations, the EU settlement scheme was to deal with those individuals living in Britain, and that was to give Europeans the right to reside in Britain. If you actually look in the figures of recent applications for that scheme, it's almost like a third of those individuals applying as to be European settled individuals in Britain are from outside of Europe, coming from places like Bangladesh and Pakistan. So the problem is that these schemes, these great grand schemes, whenever they get introduced, are always exploited, and there are always loopholes found that really make a mockery of the whole process.
Right. And one of the numbers that's interesting is the asylum claim numbers, right, which has apparently almost doubled since 2021. 108,000 people claimed asylum in 2024, related to 84,000 cases, 18% more than in 2023 and higher than the previous recorded peak of 103,000 in 2002. So, you know, there's going to be all kinds of little, you know, interesting snippets like that inside these figures, aren't there?
Yeah, so I think throughout today we'll see a lot of those stories coming to the fore as people analyse the data a bit more. I think on the asylum point, it really is actually quite frankly ridiculous that we would have more asylum claims than we would have done 20 years ago. I mean, I think the world back in 2003 was probably quite unsafe, and there was a lot of disruption clearly in the Middle East. I think what that therefore shows is that our asylum system now is effectively thrown open its arms to anyone who wants to make an application. And of course, we know that the Labour Party are bringing forward plans to effectively grant amnesty to all those people that have come into the country illegally on the small boats as well, adding to a huge pull factor, and therefore more individuals are likely to arrive over the next 12 months as well.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And apparently, according to these numbers on what they're calling irregular arrivals, which we call illegal arrivals, thank you very much indeed, 44,000 in 2024, 19% up on the previous year. There were 37,000 small boat arrivals in 2024, which was 84% of what they're calling illegal arrivals, 25% more than the previous year. So it all adds up, doesn't it? I mean, 37,000 small boat arrivals, bigger than anything that's been before, and there's no reason to suggest that 2025 will be any different, really, is there?
No, and you can hear our economy creaking with the strain of this. Of course, the asylum system costs us billions and billions of pounds every single year. On the illegal side of things, when it comes to legal migration, many of these individuals will be in low-wage jobs, or actually they're not making a positive fiscal contribution to the Treasury either. It's a whole real mess, to be quite frank, and I don't think that without real political will or recognising the concerns of the British voters, the Labour Party are going to do anything on this. The asylum system is probably going to find itself under increasing pressure over the next 12 months, with the Labour Party having scrapped many parts of the Conservatives' illegal migration plans, such as Rwanda, and the idea that those that come into our country illegally can never claim British citizenship. Labour seem to be rowing back on that to some extent as well. So I think the pull factor will remain there on the illegal side of things.
Yes, I think so. Well, we'll keep looking at all these figures, and I thank you very much for giving us the first look at them, Robert, Research Director from the Centre for Migration Control, Robert Bates there, with the first look at what these figures actually tell us. What they do tell us is that asylum seekers' numbers are going up quite rapidly and going up quite a lot by comparison. There's some losses in the actual net migration figure, partly because people coming now on student visas are not bringing, loads and loads of their family members with them, but that doesn't really put much of a drop in the ocean. So what he says is still a migration figure of somewhere approaching 800 to 900,000 people in a single year, which means, once again, not far off 1 million, which means, once again, in 5 years' time, there'll be another 5 million. In 10 years' time, there'll be another 10 million, or possibly more than that. Absolutely extraordinary. Let's talk to Margaret in Glasgow, who wants to say something about Ukraine and our former Defence Minister, Sir Gerald Howarth. Margaret, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Thank you for taking my call. I came down the stairs this morning, turned on the radio, and I get so frustrated. The first time I've ever called in, I cannot believe the amount of liberals that are calling for war.
Yeah.
They all want war, and his comments about Donald Trump and he's a very rude man just sums up the problem that we have in the world today. Mike, if I can very briefly, your listeners must know that Russia didn't invade Ukraine, you're right. Russia did invade Ukraine, but they've been provoked. They've been provoked beyond the point where they have to defend their lands. And in 1989, Perestroika, Gorbachev said, don't extend past Germany.
Yeah.
They've extended into a further 13 NATO, taking countries into NATO.
Yeah.
And there was a memo sent to Condoleezza Rice back when she was Secretary of State that basically said net means net, which was when it came to Ukraine. Now, Ukraine, unfortunately, are fighting a proxy war on behalf of the CIA and America. And what we have is a president who has come in and said, enough is enough. We don't want any war. I'm changing the mandate. I don't want this. And everybody's apoplectic at a president trying to end a war.
I know.
And you get the likes of Sir Gerald this morning, and Dan Hodges has been on for a couple of weeks now. Go to war, go to war. Russia have more nuclear warheads than any other country. What does it mean? It's easy to sit on your soapbox and say, let's go to war. I have a young child who, if I was in Ukraine in the next couple of years, my son would be getting dragged off the street for conscription. Why do we want to go to war? Let's get the war ended. And this big lie about unprovoked and Vladimir Putin's the bad guy, he's the bad guy. I'm not saying he's a good guy.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. But no, this is the point. The point is, it's a very much more complex situation, and surely any way to settle it is a good way to settle it at the end of the day, because you want to stop the people killing each other. We've got another bumper sticker that's come in, but I don't think I've got it in front of me. But the bumper stickers are going out. You will be getting one in the post today. There's a golden ticket to be had as well. Julie Hartley-Brewer's here. Very good morning.
I haven't got one yet.
Have you not been given one?
No, I want one. I want it to be given to me by you, on a red sort of, velvet.
Yes. Okay, I'll see if I can arrange that. I shall see if I